The poison tasted like almonds and regret. I knew what it was the moment the bitterness touched my tongue, but I swallowed anyway, because at that point, after everything, death felt like mercy. My husband, Chen Yuzi, stood at the foot of my bed, his handsome face carved from indifference, and behind him, my sister, Chen Lanying, no, she'd always been Shen Lanying, I just refused to see it, smiled with those delicate lips I'd once defended to my parents as merely prettier than mine, not evidence of her stolen beauty, her stolen life, her stolen everything. "You should have just died quietly in the countryside, sister," Lanying said, and her voice was sweet poison too, the kind I'd been drinking for 8 years without knowing. "Brother Yuzi and I have been in love since we were 15. You were just an inconvenience father insisted upon." 15. They'd been 15 when they fell in love. I'd married Yuzi at 18, which meant for 3 years before our wedding, before I'd ever even met him, he'd already belonged to her. The wedding where I'd wept with joy had been his funeral. The wedding night, where I'd offered myself with trembling hands, had been his punishment. Every year I'd spent trying to be a good wife had been their joke. My father stood in the doorway, Minister Shen Guanghui, whose name opened every door in the capital, whose favor the emperor himself sought, whose eldest daughter had just been poisoned in her marriage bed. And he looked at me the way one looks at a task finally completed. "Shen Que," he said, and even my name in his mouth sounded wrong, as if he'd only borrowed it temporarily and was now returning it. "You were useful once. Your marriage to Chen Yuzi secured the military alliance I needed, but Lan Ying carries his child now, and your continued existence complicates inheritance." I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. The poison was working through my veins like ice, and all I could think was how stupid I'd been, how blind, how pathetically, desperately eager to be loved by people who'd never even liked me. "You're wondering why," my mother said, stepping into the room. Lady Shen, born of the imperial Shu clan, whose bloodline was supposed to protect me. She held a handkerchief to her nose, as if my dying body offended her sense of smell. "The midwife switched you at birth, Que. Lan Ying is my true daughter. You're the maid's child who should have been drowned, but instead stole 15 years of luxury you never deserved." The room tilted. No, I was falling, sliding down the bed, but no one moved to catch me. "We let you live," Father continued, "because the Chen family's marriage proposal came when you were already engaged to Yuzi. Breaking it would have insulted Minister Chen. So we waited. You served your purpose. You gave us 8 years of political stability. Now Lan Ying will give us an heir tied to both families, and you will be remembered as the tragic first wife who died of illness," Yuzi finished. He looked at me then, really looked at me for perhaps the first time in our marriage, and I saw nothing. Not hatred, not guilt, just mild irritation, as if I were a horse that had gone lame before its useful years were done. Not terrible. In 8 years of marriage, that was my eulogy. Not terrible. The poison had reached my heart now. I could feel it, a crushing weight that made each breath a battle. My vision blurred, but through the haze I saw Lan Ying step closer. She was wearing my favorite robe, the crimson one embroidered with phoenix feathers that I'd received from the Empress herself for organizing the spring festival banquet. It looked better on her. Everything looked better on her. "I'll take good care of your jewelry," she whispered, leaning down so only I could hear, "and your reputation. Everyone will remember Minister Shen's eldest daughter who died so tragically young, so devoted to her husband that even in death she smiled. That's the story we'll tell. That's the lie that will bury you." I tried to speak, tried to curse them, curse her, curse the heavens that had made me so stupid, but my throat had closed, and all that came out was a wet, desperate sound like an animal drowning. "It's done," Father said. Chen Yuzi, you'll announce her death tomorrow morning. Sudden fever. We've already bribed the physician. The funeral will be modest. We don't want too much attention. Understood, Minister Shen. They left, all of them, filing out of my room as if leaving a dinner party, already discussing the funeral arrangements, the inheritance distribution, Lan Ying's wedding date. My mother paused at the door, glanced back once, and for a heartbeat I hoped, but no. She closed the door softly, considerately, the way you close the door on a room you're finished with. I died alone in that bed, died choking on my own blood while wearing a nightgown Lan Ying had chosen for me because she said white made me look pure, and I'd been so grateful for her attention that I didn't question why she wanted me in white, in burial white. I died listening to their laughter echo down the corridor, died knowing I'd spent 26 years trying to earn love from people who'd been planning my murder since the day they discovered I wasn't really their daughter. My last thought, as the darkness closed in, wasn't revenge. It was simpler, more pathetic. I thought, I wish I'd known. I wish I'd known so I could have stopped trying. And then there was nothing. Until there was everything. I woke up gasping, choking on air instead of blood, my hands clawing at my throat for a poison that wasn't there. Sunlight, bright, cheerful, obscene sunlight, poured through windows that should have been closed, that had been closed in those final moments, and I lurched upright in a bed that was familiar and wrong all at once. Miss, you're awake!" A young voice, frightened and relieved. "You've been unconscious for 2 days. We were so worried." I turned and the world stopped. Chu Jin, my maid Chu Jin, who died 3 years into my marriage from pneumonia, was standing beside my bed holding a basin of water, her round face creased with concern, her hands steady and strong, and impossibly alive. "What?" I whispered, and my voice was wrong too, younger, clearer, without the careful modulation I'd learned to survive the Chen household. "What day is it?" "The 15th day of the 3rd month, miss. You collapsed during the garden party, don't you remember? The physician said it was heat stroke, but—" The 15th day of the 3rd month. I knew that date. I knew it the way you know your own name, your own face. The 15th day of the 3rd month was the day of my engagement party to Chen Yuzi, the day I'd first met him, first seen his elegant face and brilliant smile, and thought myself the luckiest woman in the capital. The day my parents had announced the marriage alliance with such pride, and Lan Ying had cried pretty tears and called me the most fortunate sister in the world. 8 years before my death, I was 18 years old again. I started laughing. Chu Jin stepped back, alarmed, probably thinking the heat stroke had damaged my mind, and maybe it had. Maybe I had died and this was hell, some cosmic joke where I'd be forced to live through it all again, make the same mistakes, die the same death over and over and over. No, because I remembered. Every moment of those 8 years was crystallized in my mind like insects trapped in amber, perfect and horrible and mine. I remembered Yu Zei's cold shoulder on our wedding night, remembered Lan Ying's careful, poisonous suggestions that always made things worse, remembered my mother's increasing distance, my father's impatience, the 1,000 tiny cruelties that had bled me dry long before the poison finished the job. I remembered, and they didn't know I remembered. The laughter died in my throat, replaced by something colder, sharper, more dangerous than anything I'd ever felt in my previous life. Because in that life, I'd been weak, desperate for love, for acceptance, for the smallest scrap of kindness. I bent and broken and twisted myself into whatever shape they wanted, thinking if I just tried hard enough, sacrificed enough, suffered enough, eventually they'd see my worth.
but I knew now that they'd never see my worth because they'd never looked for it. My worth had only ever been measured in utility, in political advantage, in how easily I could be used and discarded. Well, I was about to become very, very difficult to discard. "Chujin," I said, and my voice was steady now, cold and clear like winter water. "Cancel the garden party. Tell my parents I'm still unwell and need rest." "But miss, the engagement announcement? Everyone is waiting." "Let them wait." I swung my legs out of bed. My body moved with the careful, practiced grace I'd learned over 8 years of being Chen Yuze's wife. Strange how muscle memory persisted even across death. "Chujin," I said, my voice steady now, cold and clear like winter water. "Tell Minister Shen and Lady Shu I'll join them for dinner to discuss the engagement. Private family meal, no guests." Chujin hesitated, clearly confused by this sudden show of backbone from the eager, people-pleasing girl I'd been, the girl who'd been so excited about her engagement party that she'd commissioned special dresses, planned special entertainment, wanted everything perfect so everyone would celebrate her great fortune. "Miss, are you certain you're well? Should I call the physician?" "I'm better than I've been in years," I said, and it was true. My head was clear, my hands were steady, and for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I knew exactly what I was doing. "Chujin," I said, and my voice was steady now, cold and clear like winter water. "Tell Minister Shen and Lady Shu I'll join them for dinner to discuss the engagement. Private family meal, no guests." Chujin hesitated, clearly confused by this sudden show of backbone from the eager, people-pleasing girl I'd been, the girl who'd been so excited about her engagement party that she'd commissioned special dresses, planned special entertainment, wanted everything perfect so everyone would celebrate her great fortune. "Miss, are you certain you're well? Should I call the physician?" "I'm better than I've been in years," I said, and it was true. My head was clear, my hands were steady, and for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I knew exactly what I was doing.
I walked to the mirror, a luxury item, polished bronze that cost more than most families earned in a year, and studied the face reflected there. 18 years old, skin still soft with youth, eyes still clear and hopeful, no trace yet of the desperate sadness that would mark my features by the time I died. I was beautiful, I realized with distant surprise. I'd forgotten that. Spent so many years hearing how Lan Ying was prettier, more graceful, more refined, that I'd stopped seeing my own face clearly. But I was beautiful. Different from Lan Ying's delicate, doll-like prettiness, I had stronger features, sharper eyes, a mouth made for commands rather than pouts. No wonder they'd worked so hard to convince me otherwise. Beauty was power in the capital, and they couldn't afford to let me know I had it. I smiled at my reflection, and it was nothing like the soft, eager smiles I'd worn in this life. It was the smile I'd learned in the Chen household, the smile that showed teeth. 8 years. They'd given themselves 8 years to destroy me slowly, carefully, making sure I was too broken to fight back when the poison finally came. But they'd made a mistake. They'd taught me exactly how they operated, exactly what they valued, exactly how to hurt them where it mattered most. And I had 8 years to do it. The dinner was exactly as I remembered it. The same dishes, the same servants, the same seating arrangement. Father at the head of the table, mother to his right, Lan Ying to his left, and me beside Lan Ying where I could be conveniently ignored. The only difference was that this time I noticed. I noticed how Father's eyes lingered on Lan Ying with warmth they never held for me. Noticed how Mother's hand rested briefly on Lan Ying's shoulder as she passed, a casual affection she never showed me. Noticed how both of them had already shifted their attention away from me before I'd even finished speaking, as if my words were just polite noise to be endured. In my first life, I'd blamed myself, thought I was boring, awkward, not clever enough to hold their interest. Now I knew better. They'd made their choice before I'd even entered the room.
Chi-Yue, father said without looking up from his wine, I understand you were unwell, but canceling the engagement party was inappropriate. The Chen family was expecting. I want to break the engagement, I said. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. Even the servants froze. Father's head snapped up, and for the first time in my memory, he looked directly at me. Really looked at me, not through me or past me. What did you say? I want to break the engagement to Chen Yuze. I kept my voice level, respectful, no emotion. I'd learned from the best, after all. I don't believe we're compatible. Compatible? Mother's voice was ice. Shen Chi-Yue, you will marry Chen Yuze as arranged. This alliance is critical to your father's position, and you will not jeopardize it with childish whims. It's not a whim. I took a sip of tea, noted with distant satisfaction that my hands didn't shake. I've thought carefully about this. Chen Yuze and I have different values, different expectations for marriage. I don't believe I can make him happy, and I certainly don't believe he can make me happy. It's better to end this now before resources are wasted on a wedding that will only lead to misery. Lan Ying gasped, her delicate hand flying to her mouth. Sister, how can you say such things? Brother Yuze is so accomplished, so handsome, so respected. Any woman in the capital would be honored to marry him. Are you truly so ungrateful? Ah, there it was, the poison wrapped in concern. In my first life, I'd internalized that message, believed I was ungrateful, selfish, throwing away a gift I didn't deserve. This time, I just smiled. Any woman in the capital would be honored, I agreed, so let one of them marry him. Lan Ying, for instance. I turned to face her directly, watched her perfect face shift through a series of micro-expressions, surprise, calculation, fear, before settling back into concerned sisterly love. You're always praising him, always talking about his accomplishments, his kindness. You clearly admire him greatly. Perhaps father could arrange a different alliance. The silence this time was different, dangerous. Father's knuckles had gone white around his wine cup, and mother had gone very, very still. Shen Chi-Yue, father said, and his voice carried a warning I'd never heard directed at me before because I'd never challenged him before. You overstep. The engagement is arranged. The contracts are signed. You will marry Chen Yuze in 3 months' time, and this discussion is over. Then I'll enter a nunnery, I said calmly. Lan Ying actually squeaked. Mother's face flushed with rage. Father looked like I'd struck him. You wouldn't dare.
Wouldn't I? I met his eyes steadily, and I saw the moment he realized I absolutely would. A daughter who enters religious service is exempt from arranged marriages. The Temple of Eternal Mercy accepts women of good families. I could leave tomorrow. The scandal would be minimal, I continued smoothly. A young woman, overcome with spiritual devotion, choosing the path of enlightenment over worldly concerns. Quite romantic, actually. The Empress herself might approve. She's known for her Buddhist sympathies. And the Chen family would be free to seek a bride who actually wants to marry their son. I was gambling that father valued his political reputation more than punishing me. Gambling that the idea of a daughter in a nunnery was less damaging than a daughter who'd publicly refused a marriage. Gambling that I'd read him correctly, that I understood the arithmetic of his ambition. Father's jaw worked. Mother looked ready to lunge across the table. But Lan Ying was thinking. I could see it, the wheels turning behind those pretty eyes. And then she spoke, her voice soft and trembling, absolutely perfect. Father, mother, perhaps sister is right. Everyone turned to stare at her. I mean, she continued, dabbing at her eyes with her napkin, if sister truly doesn't want this marriage, forcing her will only lead to unhappiness, and brother Yuze deserves a wife who loves him, doesn't he? It's just, oh, I know I shouldn't say this, but I've always thought they weren't well matched. Sister is so serious, so scholarly, and brother Yuze loves poetry and music and laughter. They'd only make each other miserable.
Hook, line, and sinker. My dear sister had just planted the seeds of her own alternative in the simplest, most innocent-seeming way possible. In my first life, I'd never noticed this particular poison. This time, I'd counted on it. "And who would you suggest instead?" Mother asked, her tone dangerous. Lanying dropped her eyes, the picture of modest reluctance. I couldn't possibly." "Say it," Father commanded. "Well, Brother Yudzei and I have always gotten along wonderfully, and I know the Chen family values artistic cultivation, which I've studied extensively. I would never presume to take sister's place, but if the engagement must be broken, perhaps I could fulfill the alliance instead, if it would save Father's reputation." There it was, the offer she'd been planning to make anyway, just 3 months later after I'd married Yudzei and made everyone miserable enough that replacing me seemed like a Versi. But I'd forced her to show her hand early, before she and Yudzei had time to build their tragic romance narrative, before I'd been thoroughly discredited. Father looked at me, then at Lanying, then at Mother. I could see the calculation happening. The engagement to Chen Yudzei was valuable, but not irreplaceable. Keeping me happy enough to not cause a scandal was also valuable. And Lanying, his true daughter, the daughter he actually loved, putting her in the prestigious position instead of the changeling maid's child, that clearly appealed to him. "This is highly irregular," he said finally. "The Chen family wants a bride from the Shen household. They want the alliance, not specifically me. And as Lanying said, she and Chen Yudzei are better matched. I'm sure Minister Chen would understand given the circumstances." What I didn't say, Minister Chen would absolutely understand, because in 3 days there would be an incident at the Spring Festival banquet. Chen Yudzei would meet Lanying properly for the first time. In my first life, I'd introduced them myself, eager to share my wonderful fiancé with my beloved sister, and he'd be entranced. By the end of the week, he'd be the one asking his father to change the engagement, claiming true love. All I did was speed up the timeline and make it my idea first. Dinner continued in tense silence. I ate delicately, correctly, showing none of the giddy relief I'd felt in my first life when I thought I'd secured such a brilliant match. Finally, Father dismissed us, and Lanying caught my arm as we left the dining hall.
"Sister," she whispered urgently, "are you truly sure about this? Brother Yudzei is such a good man, and Father's right that breaking the engagement is irregular. I'm only offering to take your place because I don't want you to suffer, but if you've changed your mind—" "I haven't," I said, and gently removed her hand from my arm. "You'll make him a better wife than I ever could, Lanying. You're perfect for each other." Her eyes searched mine, looking for the jealousy, the resentment, the weakness she could exploit. I gave her nothing, just a calm, sisterly smile and a pat on her shoulder. "I'm happy for you," I said, truly. And I was, because watching them destroy each other would be infinitely more satisfying than anything I could do directly. The Spring Festival banquet came 3 days later, exactly as I remembered. The Empress had commissioned the event to celebrate the new season, and every prominent family in the capital was expected to attend. In my first life, I'd worn pink silk and jasmine flowers in my hair, because Lanying suggested it would make me look youthful and fresh. I'd looked like a child playing dress-up, I realized now. Looked young and naive and easy to manipulate. This time, I wore deep blue brocade embroidered with silver cranes, sophisticated, elegant, the kind of dress a woman wears, not a girl, and I left my hair simple, pulled back in a style that emphasized my features rather than hiding behind softness. Q Jin had stared when I emerged from my rooms. "Miss, you look—" "Different?" I supplied. "Powerful," she whispered. "Good." The banquet was held in the Imperial Gardens, with tables arranged around a central pavilion where performances would take place. Father had already left with Mother. I wasn't important enough to arrive with them, apparently. Fine. Better to make my own entrance. I walked through the garden gates alone, my posture perfect, my expression serene. Heads turned. I saw the double takes, the whispers, the reassessment happening in real time. Shen Shi Yue, the boring eldest daughter of Minister Shen, who wore pretty pink dresses and smiled too much and never said anything interesting, had been replaced by someone who looked like she actually deserved her prominent family name. Miss Shen, a familiar voice, bright with false enthusiasm. Lady Joe, a social climber who'd spent my entire first life alternating between befriending me for access to my father and mocking me behind painted fans. What a stunning dress! Quite a departure from your usual style. I decided it was time for a change, I said coolly. Don't you agree, Lady Joe? Sometimes we outgrow things that once suited us. Her smile froze. The ladies with her, Lady Wang and Lady Feng, equally two-faced, exchanged glances. They weren't sure how to respond to this version of me, and I could see them recalibrating their approach. Well, Lady Wang said carefully, change can be refreshing, though I hope you're feeling better. We heard you were quite ill after the garden party. I was suffering from something, I agreed, but I've recovered, completely. I left them standing there and made my way toward my family's assigned table. Father and mother were already seated, with Lan Ying beside them, looking ethereal in pale green. And next to Lan Ying, clearly invited despite the broken engagement, was Chen Yuzhe. He looked exactly as I remembered, handsome in that classical way, sharp cheekbones, refined features, eyes that seemed deep and thoughtful until you realized there was nothing behind them but ambition and self-interest. In my first life, I thought he looked like a scholar poet. Now I saw what he really was, a pretty ornament for a political alliance. QUA, Father said as I approached, his tone carrying a warning. You're late. I apologize, Father. I bowed respectfully, noting how Yuze's eyes tracked my movement with something that might have been surprise. Good. Let him be surprised. Let him wonder where the eager girl he'd met 3 days ago had gone. Miss Shen, Yuze said, standing to greet me properly, your father has explained the situation. I hope there are no hard feelings. These matters are often complex. No hard feelings at all, Lord Chen, I replied with perfect politeness. I'm certain the revised arrangement will suit everyone better. Something flickered in his eyes. Confusion? Suspicion? Hard to tell, but he was definitely looking at me differently than he had 3 days ago when I was a blushing, stammering girl so grateful for his attention I could barely form sentences. Revised arrangement? Mother interjected sharply. Nothing is finalized. But it will be, Lan Yang said softly, reaching over to place her hand on Yuze's arm in a gesture that would have looked innocent if I hadn't known better. I mean, Father said the discussions with Minister Chen went well, didn't he? And Brother Yuze and I have always been such good friends. I'm sure we can make everyone happy. Yuze's expression softened as he looked at her. There it was, that same besotted look I'd seen in my first life, when he'd gazed at Lan Yang over my head at family dinners, when he'd smiled at her jokes and ignored mine, when he'd disappeared into her rooms and told me he was attending to estate business. They deserved each other, I thought coldly. They absolutely deserved each other. The performances began. Dancers and musicians, acrobats and poets. I watched politely, applauded at the right moments, played the perfect noble daughter. And all the while, I was counting minutes until the incident that would cement everything. It happened during the poetry competition. The Empress, in her wisdom, had decided young nobles should demonstrate their literary cultivation by composing verses on the theme of renewal. In my first life, I'd been so nervous about performing in front of Yuze that I'd frozen completely, managed only 3 clumsy lines before sitting down in humiliation. Lan Yang had gracefully stepped in to save face for the family, composing a beautiful poem that everyone praised.
Yuze had looked at her with such admiration, and I'd been so grateful she'd rescued me that I'd never questioned why she'd been so perfectly prepared. Now I knew. She'd stolen the poem from my mother's private collection. Lady Shu had been quite a poet in her youth, before marriage and status made such accomplishments unnecessary. The collection was locked in her study, but Lang Yang had access because Mother trusted her true daughter, and I knew which poem she'd used, which meant I could use it first. When my name was called, I stood gracefully, walked to the central pavilion with my head high, aware of every eye on me, every person remembering the awkward girl from 3 days ago and wondering what I'd do now. I felt Yuze's gaze, heavy and evaluating, felt Father's irritation, Mother's disdain, Lan Yang's confidence. And then I spoke. Spring rain falls on ancient stones, washing away the dust of winter's lies. What was buried rises new, roots reaching deep where shallow flowers died. The phoenix knows her feathers burn, yet from the ashes she returns, not soft with youth, but forged in flame, aware now of the price of trust misplaced. Silence, and then applause, genuine and surprised. The Empress herself was nodding, and I saw several of the poetry masters exchanging impressed glances. I bowed and returned to my seat, where Lan Yang had gone very, very pale. "That was beautiful, sister. I've never heard you compose anything so accomplished." "I've been practicing," I said simply. "You're next, aren't you? I'm sure you'll do wonderfully." She stood mechanically, walked to the pavilion, and I watched her face as she realized her carefully planned triumph had just been stolen. She couldn't use Mother's poem now. It would sound like a pale imitation of mine, make her look derivative instead of brilliant. She'd have to improvise. Lan Yang opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Spring brings the flowers bloom like—" She trailed off, her face flushing with embarrassment. The audience shifted uncomfortably. Father's expression had gone dark. Mother looked devastated. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Lan Yang managed something about blossoms and renewal that was perfectly adequate, but completely forgettable. She sat down quickly, not meeting anyone's eyes, and for the first time since my rebirth, I felt something warm and genuine bloom in my chest. Oh, this was what revenge felt like, this small, vicious satisfaction of watching her fail, of taking her weapon and using it first, better, leaving her defenseless. I wanted more. The engagement was officially broken 2 weeks later. Father announced it at a family dinner with about as much ceremony as one might discuss changing tea suppliers. "The Qin family has agreed to transfer the arrangement to Lan Yang. Qiuyen, you'll attend the engagement party, but keep a low profile. We don't need gossip." "Of course, Father," I said obediently. Lan Yang glowed with triumph, all trace of her poetry failure forgotten, or rather rewritten. She'd told everyone she'd been so moved by my beautiful poem that she'd lost her own words, which was actually quite clever, turned her humiliation into sisterly devotion. But I noticed she no longer looked at me quite with the same condescending pity. Now there was wariness in her eyes, a new carefulness in how she spoke to me. Good. Let her be careful. Let her wonder. The engagement party was smaller than the one that had been planned for me. Lan Yang insisted on modesty, claimed she didn't want to overshadow my sacrifice. So thoughtful, so considerate. Everyone praised her grace. I wore gray silk, deliberately understated, and spent the party in the background exactly as Father had commanded. But I watched Yuze present Lan Ying with a jade bracelet that was almost certainly the one originally meant for me. Watched them perform a duet together, their voices blending prettily. Watched my parents beam with pride at their true daughter, their perfect daughter, their daughter who was everything I wasn't. And I watched Minister Chen, Yuze's father, who kept glancing my way with an expression I'd never seen in my first life. Interest. Calculation. Miss Shen,
he said when he finally approached me in a quiet corner of the garden. "I wanted to apologize for any inconvenience the change in arrangements may have caused you." "No apology necessary, Minister Chen. I'm happy for my sister." "Are you?" He studied me intently. "Forgive my bluntness, but you seem quite different from the young woman I met 2 weeks ago. More composed, more—" He paused, clearly searching for the right word. "Present?" I supplied. "Exactly." He smiled, and it was sharp. "My son is a fool." I blinked, genuinely surprised. "Minister Chen—" "Oh, I love the boy, but I'm not blind. He chose beauty over substance, poetry over practicality. He and your sister will make a pretty picture together, but I doubt they'll manage anything more substantial." He took a sip of wine. "Whereas you, Miss Shen, strike me as someone who understands that marriage is a partnership, not a romance. Someone who could actually build something." I should have demurred, should have played modest, but there was something in his tone that suggested he'd see through that, so I met his eyes directly. "What are you suggesting, Minister Chen?" "I have a nephew," he said casually, "Chen Si-ming, my late brother's son. He's currently serving as military governor in Yunnan province, quite successfully. He needs a wife with political connections and intelligence. I think you'd suit each other." Chen Si-ming. I knew that name. In my first life, he'd become one of the most powerful men in the empire, eventually rising to command the entire Southern Army. He'd married some minor noble's daughter who died young, and he'd never remarried. And I'd been trapped in the capital, trapped in a marriage to his useless cousin, never knowing there was another option. "I'm honored by the suggestion," I said carefully, "but I should mention, my father and I have different priorities sometimes. I'm not certain he'd approve of a match so far from the capital." "Which is why I'll speak to him directly," Minister Chen replied. "Your father values strategic alliances. Yunnan province is increasingly important, and my nephew's influence is growing. This would be advantageous for the Shen family." He was right, of course. Father would absolutely approve of an alliance that expanded his network. The only reason he hadn't arranged it in my first life was because I'd already been married off to Yu Zhe. But now— "If my father agrees," I said slowly, "I would be open to discussing this further." Minister Chen smiled. "Excellent. I'll arrange for correspondence between you and my nephew. Get to know each other before any formal announcements. Discreet. Sensible." He walked away, leaving me standing in the garden with my mind racing. This was unexpected. I hadn't planned for this. My entire revenge strategy had been built around staying unmarried long enough to establish independence, to build my own power base before anyone could trap me again. But Chen Si-ming, he was different. Powerful, yes, but also far from the capital, far from my family's manipulation, far from court politics and poisonous sisters. And if I remembered correctly, he'd had a reputation for competence and directness, not particularly warm, but fair. He'd treated his soldiers well, managed his territory efficiently, and never involved himself in the backstabbing games that consumed the capital. Which meant either he was genuinely honorable, or he was so good at playing the game that no one realized he was playing at all. Either way, it was interesting. The first letter from Chen Si-ming arrived 3 weeks later, delivered by private courier. Father had already approved the match with disturbing speed. Apparently, Minister Chen's political weight outweighed any paternal sentiment. Mother sniffed disdainfully and said Yunnan was good. Let her be careful. Let her wonder. The engagement party was smaller than the one that had been planned for me. Lan Yang insisted on modesty, claimed she didn't want to overshadow my sacrifice. So thoughtful, so considerate. Everyone praised her grace. I wore gray silk, deliberately understated, and spent the party in the background exactly as Father had commanded. But I watched Yu Zhe present Lan Ying with a jade bracelet that was almost certainly the one originally meant for me. Watched them perform a duet together, their voices blending prettily. Watched my parents beam with pride at their true daughter, their perfect daughter, their daughter who was everything I wasn't. And I watched Minister Chen, Yu Ze's father, who kept glancing my way with an expression I'd never seen in my first life. Interest. Calculation. "Miss Shen," he said when he finally approached me in a quiet corner of the garden, "I wanted to apologize for any inconvenience the change in arrangements may have caused you." "No apology necessary, Minister Chen. I'm happy for my sister." "Are you?" He studied me intently. "Forgive my bluntness, but you seem quite different from the young woman I met 2 weeks ago. More composed, more—" He paused, clearly searching for the right word. "Present?" I supplied. "Exactly." He smiled, and it was sharp. "My son is a fool." I blinked, genuinely surprised. "Minister Chen—" "Oh, I love the boy, but I'm not blind. He chose beauty over substance, poetry over practicality. He and your sister will make a pretty picture together, but I doubt they'll manage anything more substantial." He took a sip of wine. "Whereas you, Miss Shen, strike me as someone who understands that marriage is a partnership, not a romance. Someone who could actually build something." I should have demurred, should have played modest, but there was something in his tone that suggested he'd see through that, so I met his eyes directly. "What are you suggesting, Minister Chen?" "I have a nephew," he said casually, "Chen Si-ming, my late brother's son. He's currently serving as military governor in Yunnan province, quite successfully. He needs a wife with political connections and intelligence. I think you'd suit each other." Chen Si-ming. I knew that name. In my first life, he'd become one of the most powerful men in the empire, eventually rising to command the entire Southern Army. He'd married some minor noble's daughter who died young, and he'd never remarried. And I'd been trapped in the capital, trapped in a marriage to his useless cousin, never knowing there was another option. "I'm honored by the suggestion," I said carefully, "but I should mention, my father and I have different priorities sometimes. I'm not certain he'd approve of a match so far from the capital." "Which is why I'll speak to him directly," Minister Chen replied. "Your father values strategic alliances. Yunnan province is increasingly important, and my nephew's influence is growing. This would be advantageous for the Shen family." He was right, of course. Father would absolutely approve of an alliance that expanded his network. The only reason he hadn't arranged it in my first life was because I'd already been married off to Yu Ze. But now— "If my father agrees," I said slowly, "I would be open to discussing this further." Minister Chen smiled. "Excellent. I'll arrange for correspondence between you and my nephew. Get to know each other before any formal announcements. Discreet. Sensible." He walked away, leaving me standing in the garden with my mind racing. This was unexpected. I hadn't planned for this. My entire revenge strategy had been built around staying unmarried long enough to establish independence, to build my own power base before anyone could trap me again. But Chen Si-ming, he was different. Powerful, yes, but also far from the capital, far from my family's manipulation, far from court politics and poisonous sisters. And if I remembered correctly, he'd had a reputation for competence and directness, not particularly warm, but fair. He'd treated his soldiers well, managed his territory efficiently, and never involved himself in the backstabbing games that consumed the capital. Which meant either he was genuinely honorable, or he was so good at playing the game that no one realized he was playing at all. Either way, it was interesting. The first letter from Chen Si-ming arrived 3 weeks later, delivered by private courier. Father had already approved the match with disturbing speed. Apparently, Minister Chen's political weight outweighed any paternal sentiment. Mother sniffed disdainfully and said Yunnan was barely civilized, but even she couldn't argue with the strategic advantage. And Lan Ying had smiled her sweet smile and said she'd miss me terribly, which we both knew was a lie. I opened the letter in my rooms with Quzin standing guard. "Miss Shen, my uncle speaks highly of your intellect and composure. I am less eloquent than my cousin Yu Ze and less interested in poetic courtship, so I will be direct. I need a wife who can manage political complexities, who understands the realities of power, and who will not expect me to be home for romantic dinners when there are military campaigns to plan. In return, I offer protection, resources, and independence. You will have authority over the household and freedom to pursue your own interests within reason. Our marriage will be a partnership of mutual benefit, not a love match. If this arrangement suits you, please respond. If not, I will inform my uncle that we are incompatible and you may seek a different match. Chen Ximing. I read it 3 times, looking for the trap, for the hidden manipulation, but there was nothing, just blunt honesty that was almost refreshing after years of dealing with people who wrapped poison in sugar. "Miss?" Quzin asked nervously. "Is it acceptable?" "It's perfect," I murmured. Because it was. A husband who wanted a partner instead of a decoration. A marriage based on mutual advantage instead of pretended love. Distance from my family. Power and resources to build my own foundation. This was better than anything I could have planned. I wrote my response that same night. "Lord Chen, your directness is appreciated. I am similarly uninterested in poetic courtship or romantic illusions. I seek a marriage where I can be useful rather than ornamental, where my mind is valued as much as my family connections. I can manage political complexities and understand the realities of power better than you might expect. I do not require romance or constant attention. What I require is respect, resources, and the freedom to pursue my own objectives. If you can provide these things, I believe we will suit each other well. Shen Chi Yue." His response came surprisingly quickly, only 2 weeks later, which suggested he'd had the courier ride hard. I was starting to like this efficient military governor. "Miss Shen, you will have respect, resources, and freedom. I will expect the same in return. I propose we marry within 2 months, which will allow me to return to Yunnan before the monsoon season. My uncle will handle the formal arrangements with your father. One warning, Yunnan is not the capital. It's rougher, more dangerous, less refined. Court manners matter less than practical competence. If you cannot adapt, tell me now. Chen Ximing." 2 months. Barely enough time for a proper wedding, but enough time for me to prepare. And his warning about Yunnan. Some women would have been frightened. I was relieved. Rough and dangerous meant opportunities. Less refined meant fewer of the careful social games I'd been forced to play. Practical competence over court manners? That was practically an invitation. I wrote back immediately. "Lord Chen, 2 months is acceptable. I adapt quickly. See you at the wedding. Shen Chi Yue." Lan Ying's wedding to Chen Yuze was scheduled for 1 month before mine. She'd wanted it sooner, wanted to be married first, the proper order of things. But Mother had insisted on elaborate preparations, on inviting half the capital, on making it the social event of the season. So 1 month it was. I helped with the planning, smiled and nodded when Lan Yang showed me her dress designs, offered suggestions for the banquet menu, played the supportive older sister exactly as expected. And all the while, I was planning something entirely else. Quzin thought I was being too kind. "Miss, after everything they've done."
"Patience," I told her. "Revenge is a dish best served cold, and we're still in the preparation stage." What I didn't tell her was that I had 8 years of memories, 8 years of watching my husband and my sister's affair develop, of seeing exactly how they operated, exactly what weaknesses they had. I knew that Yuze had a gambling problem he hid from his father, knew that Liang Ying's sweet demeanor masked vicious jealousy of anyone prettier than her, knew that their great love would sour within 6 months once reality set in. All I had to do was accelerate the timeline. The first piece fell into place 3 weeks before Liang Ying's wedding. I was visiting the market with Qiu Zhen, ostensibly shopping for my own wedding, when I accidentally ran into Lady Zhou at a tea house. "Miss Shen," she exclaimed, false delight dripping from every word. How wonderful to see you! I've heard such exciting news about your engagement to Governor Chen, Yunnan Province. How exotic! Quite exciting, I agreed pleasantly, though not as exciting as my sister's wedding, of course. Lord Chen Yuzhe is such a catch. Oh yes, they're perfect together, Lady Zhou agreed, though I must say I was surprised when I saw Lord Chen at the Golden Lotus last week. I'd thought he'd given up such establishments once he became engaged. The Golden Lotus, a high-end gambling house that catered to nobles who wanted to pretend they were just there for the music and wine. In my first life, Yuzhe had started frequenting it about 6 months into our marriage, always claiming he was meeting with business contacts. I'd believed him because I'd wanted to believe him. Oh, I said with carefully calibrated surprise. I didn't realize Lord Chen enjoyed gambling. Lady Zhou's eyes gleamed. She'd found gossip and she was going to share it whether I wanted her to or not. Quite enthusiastically from what I heard, he lost rather heavily on dice games. Someone said it was nearly 3,000 taels. 3,000 taels. That was the amount I remembered him losing around our first wedding anniversary. He must have had this problem longer than I realized. How concerning, I said thoughtfully. I do hope it doesn't cause trouble for my sister. The wedding is so soon. Oh, I'm sure it's nothing, Lady Zhou said quickly, backtracking now that she'd delivered her poison. Just young men being foolish. He'll settle down once he's married. He wouldn't, of course. Gamblers never settled down. They just got better at hiding it. I thanked Lady Zhou for the tea and left, mind already working. 3,000 taels was significant, but not catastrophic for someone of Yuzhe's status. But if he kept losing, kept going back, and if certain people knew about it. I had Qiuzhen make discreet inquiries. It took a week, but she finally brought me the information I needed. Yuzhe's debts were actually closer to 8,000 taels, and he'd been borrowing from a merchant named Wei Chao, who was known for lending to desperate nobles at exorbitant interest and having connections to some very dangerous people when those nobles couldn't pay. Perfect. I wrote a careful letter to Minister Chen, Yuzhe's father. Nothing accusatory, just concerned questions from his soon-to-be former daughter-in-law. Had he heard about Yuzhe's gambling? Was it something I should mention to my sister before the wedding? I'd heard such disturbing rumors, and I wanted to make sure Liang Ying wouldn't be hurt. Minister Chen's response was swift and furious. He confronted Yuzhe, who of course denied everything, but the debts were real and couldn't be hidden once Minister Chen started investigating. The explosion at the Chen household could apparently be heard from the street. 3 days before Liang Ying's wedding, Minister Chen paid the debts, all 8,000 taels plus interest, and then cut Yuzhe's allowance to almost nothing. The wedding would proceed, he announced coldly, because the contracts were signed, and breaking them would be too scandalous. But Yuzhe was on probation. One more incident, and he'd be disinherited. I heard all this from Qiuzhen, who heard it from the Chen household's cook, who heard it from the housekeeper. The servant network in the capital was better than any spy system. Liang Ying came to see me 2 days before the wedding, her face blotchy from crying. "Sister," she said, and for once the sweetness was gone from her voice, replaced with raw desperation. "Did you know about Brother Yuzhe's gambling?" I looked up from the book I was reading, a military treatise on defensive fortifications that Chen Ximing had sent me. "I'd heard rumors," I admitted. "Why? Why didn't you tell me?" Her voice broke. "Why didn't you let me walk into this?" I set down the book carefully. "You wanted him so badly, Liang Ying. Who was I to stand in the way of true love?"
She stared at me, and I saw the exact moment she realized that I knew about her and Yuza, realized that I'd known from the beginning, that I'd let her think she was getting away with everything when actually I'd just been giving her enough rope. You knew," she whispered. "I knew," I confirmed gently. "I knew he was gambling. I knew you were meeting him in secret. I knew you'd stolen Mother's poem for the spring festival. I knew everything, Liang Ying, and I let it happen anyway." "But why?" "Because watching you get exactly what you wanted felt like better revenge than fighting you for it," I smiled. You're going to marry a gambler with massive debts and an angry father. You're going to spend your life managing his mistakes, covering for him, trying to maintain the perfect image while he slowly destroys everything you've built. And you're going to do it all with a smile, because that's what proper wives do, isn't it? Her face had gone sheet white. I'll tell father. I'll tell him what you did. What did I do? I asked reasonably. Point out that the man you loved had problems? Try to warn the family? If anything, I tried to help, Lan Ying. I'm not responsible for Yuza's choices. She left without another word, and I returned to my book. 2 days later, Chen Yuza married Chen Yuza in a ceremony that was beautiful and expensive and hollow. I attended in pale blue silk, smiling serenely, and when I caught Lan Ying's eye during the vows, I saw something I'd never seen before: fear. My own wedding was simpler. Chen Ximing had returned to the capital for the ceremony, and our first meeting was in my family's receiving hall with both our families present. I'd been bracing myself for disappointment. In my first life, every introduction had been a letdown once the reality failed to match the fantasy. But Chen Ximing was unexpected. He was tall, which I'd known from descriptions, but what surprised me was how he carried himself. There was no softness, no attempt at charm. He moved like a weapon, controlled and efficient, and his eyes assessed me the way a general assesses terrain, looking for advantages and weaknesses with equal attention. Miss Shen, he said, bowing formally. Lord Chen, I replied, matching his formality. We studied each other in silence while our families exchanged awkward glances. Finally, his mouth quirked in something that might have been amusement. Your uncle said you were unusual. I'm beginning to see what he meant. Should I be offended? That depends. Are you easily offended? No. Good. Neither am I. This should work well. Father cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with this strange courtship. Perhaps you two would like some time alone to discuss the arrangements. Ximing looked at me. I nodded. We were led to the garden, where a servant brought tea and then tactfully withdrew. Your letters were more interesting than I expected, Ximing said once we were alone. Most noble daughters write about poetry and flowers. You asked about military supply chains and tax collection efficiency. Most noble daughters haven't read Sun Tzu's Art of War, I replied, but I assumed a military governor might appreciate a wife who understands logistics. I do. He studied me over his teacup. What I don't understand is why you're willing to marry me. You're a minister's daughter from a prominent family. You could have stayed in the capital, married someone with more status, lived comfortably at court. Instead, you're agreeing to move to a frontier province with a man you've never met. Why? I could have lied, could have said something about duty or adventure or love at first sight, but he was direct with me, so I returned the favor. Because the capital is full of knives, I said quietly, and I'm tired of being cut. His expression shifted, became more focused. Family knives? The sharpest kind. He was silent for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Yunnan has knives too. Different ones. Tribal politics, bandit raids, rival governors. But at least there, the knives come from the front, not from the back. I prefer front-facing knives. At least then you can see them coming. Then we understand each other, he set down his tea. One more question. What do you want from this marriage? I thought carefully before answering. Resources, protection, the space to become something more than what my family thinks I am. And what do they think you are? Useful until I'm not. Disposable. Unimportant. His eyes hardened. They're fools. Yes, I agreed, but they're powerful fools, which makes them dangerous. In Yunnan, I'm more powerful, he said flatly. Once we're married, you're under my protection. Your family can't touch you there. It was exactly what I needed to hear. Not promises of love or devotion, but practical assurance of safety and power. This man understood the game I was playing, because he was playing it too. Then I look forward to Yunnan, I said. The wedding ceremony was 3 days later. Simple by capital standards. Father clearly wasn't interested in spending money on his disappointing daughter's marriage to a provincial governor. Fine by me. I wore red silk because tradition demanded it, but I chose a design with minimal embroidery and no flowers. Practical. Strong. Chen Shiming wore his military uniform, which technically wasn't proper for a wedding, but made a statement. This was a military alliance, not a love match. Father frowned at it. Mother looked pained. Lan Ying, who'd been required to attend, watched with barely concealed bitterness. I caught her eye once during the ceremony, and she looked away quickly. She'd been married for barely a month, and already she looked tired. Yutze had apparently gambled again 2 weeks after the wedding, only a small amount, but enough that Minister Chen had threatened him publicly. The perfect couple's perfect life was showing cracks. My revenge was working beautifully, and I hadn't even had to do anything, just let them have what they wanted and watch them destroy themselves with it. The ceremony ended. We were married, and that night, as I prepared to leave the capital, possibly forever, I allowed myself one moment of satisfaction. Lan Ying had wanted my life, my engagement, my status, my carefully planned future. She'd schemed and lied and manipulated to take it all, and now she had it, every poisonous bit of it. While I rode toward Yunnan with a man who might actually be an ally, toward a province where I could build real power, toward a future that was mine instead of something stolen from me. The last thing I saw as we left the capital was Lan Ying standing in her courtyard, watching our carriage disappear. She looked small, trapped, exactly how I'd felt in my previous life when I'd watched her through the window of the Chen household, free and happy, while I withered away in golden chains. I settled back in the carriage and smiled. Chen Shiming glanced at me. Something amusing? Just thinking about my sister and how satisfying it is to give people exactly what they think they want. He studied me for a moment, then smiled, a real smile, sharp and understanding. I think I'm going to enjoy being married to you. The feeling is mutual. And as the capital faded behind us, I thought, this is only the beginning. I'd escaped the first trap, avoided the first death, but my family was still in power, Lan Ying was still protected, and Yutze's gambling debts were someone else's problem now. I needed to build something stronger, something that would let me return to the capital one day, not as Shen Qiyue, the disappointing daughter, but as something they couldn't ignore, couldn't dismiss, couldn't kill. I had 8 years of knowledge, a husband with resources and military power, and a burning, patient hatred that would fuel me through however long this took. Let them think I'd given up. Let them think I'd run away. Let them think they'd won. They'd learn the truth eventually, but by then it would be far, far too late. The journey to Yunnan took 3 weeks, 3 weeks of dusty roads, uncomfortable inns, and gradually changing landscape as the refined capital gave way to rougher, wilder territory. Chen Shiming spent most of the journey reviewing military reports and correspondence, occasionally sharing observations about the terrain or local politics. The southern provinces are more independent than the capital likes to admit, he said one evening as we camped near a river. The emperor's authority weakens the farther you get from the capital. Out here, power is more fluid.
Fluid how? I asked. Whoever controls resources controls territory. Whoever controls territory controls trade routes. Whoever controls trade routes can either support the throne or challenge it. He looked at me steadily. Right now, I control a significant portion of all 3, which makes me valuable to the emperor, but also dangerous. And you're telling me this because you need to understand what you've married into. The capital thinks I'm a loyal provincial governor who keeps the southern borders secure. What they don't realize is that I could cut off half their grain supply within a month if I chose to. I studied him in the firelight. But you don't. Not yet, he agreed. The timing isn't right, but one day it might be. And when that day comes, I need to know my wife won't panic and run back to her father. This was a test, a dangerous one.
He was admitting to borderline treason and watching to see if I'd be horrified or intrigued. I thought of father, who'd raised me for political advantage and discarded me the moment a better option appeared. Thought of mother, who'd believed I deserved less love because I wasn't truly hers. Thought of Lanying and Yuzi, who'd casually planned my death between romantic encounters. The capital, I said slowly, has taken everything from me that mattered. If one day you decide to take something from them in return, I won't object. I might even help. Shiming smiled, that sharp, dangerous smile that transformed his usually austere face. My uncle was right. You are unusual. Is that a compliment? It's the highest compliment I can give. We reached Yunnan province 6 days later. The governor's residence was less opulent than the Shen family mansion, but far more defensible, built into a hillside with thick walls and strategic sightlines. Military architecture, not decorative. "Welcome home," Shiming said as we passed through the gates. Home. The word felt strange. I'd never had a real home. The Shen mansion had been a battlefield, and the Chen household had been a prison. But this place, with its practical design and unfamiliar faces, maybe here I could build something real. The household staff assembled to meet us. Butler, housekeeper, cooks, maids, guards. They studied me with the careful assessment of people who knew their master valued competence over charm. "This is my wife, Lady Chen. She'll be managing household affairs and has my full authority to make decisions in my absence. Treat her orders as you would mine." I saw several servants exchange surprised glances. Clearly, they hadn't expected him to grant so much power so quickly. "Thank you for the warm welcome," I said, pitching my voice to Carrie. "I'm new to Yunnan and will rely on your knowledge and experience to learn how things are done here. I hope we can work together effectively." More surprised glances. They probably expected a capital lady who would demand immediate changes and look down on provincial ways. Good. Let them be pleasantly surprised. That makes converting them to loyal allies easier. The housekeeper, a stern woman named Wei Lan, showed me to my quarters. They were spacious, but simply furnished. No elaborate silk hangings or delicate ornaments. A desk, a bed, storage chests, and a small sitting area. Functional. "Lord Chen's rooms are connected through that door," Wei Lan said, pointing. "He usually keeps it locked." "That's fine. We have an understanding." Wei Lan's expression flickered with something that might have been approval. "Forgive my bluntness, my lady, but we were concerned when we heard Lord Chen was taking a capital bride. Most noble ladies from the capital don't adjust well to Yunnan." "I'm not most noble ladies," I replied. "I chose to come here specifically because it's not the capital. If I'd wanted silk cushions and poetry recitals, I would have stayed in my father's house." "What do you want, then?" Interesting question, and from her tone, a genuine one. She was evaluating whether I'd be an asset or a liability to her master.
"I want to be useful," I said honestly. "I want to learn how this province works, who the important players are, what problems need solving. I want to build something that matters instead of being decorative furniture in someone else's house." Wei Lan studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I think you and Lord Chen will suit each other well, my lady. He has no patience for decorative furniture either." The first month in Yunnan was intense. Shiming hadn't been exaggerating about the province's complexity. There were at least 5 major tribal groups in the region, each with their own territories and grievances. There were 3 rival provincial governors in neighboring territories, all competing for resources and influence. There were bandit groups that were sometimes just bandits and sometimes political insurgents, depending on who was paying them. And threading through everything was the vast network of trade routes that made Yunnan wealthy and strategically vital. Shiming gave me access to everything. Maps, reports, correspondence, financial records. He'd clearly decided that if I was going to be useful, I needed information. Most wives would find this boring, he commented one evening as we reviewed grain production reports together. Most wives weren't raised by Minister Shen, I replied. I've been analyzing political strategy since I could read. And what do you see here? I studied the map spread between us. You're deliberately keeping the tribal groups balanced against each other, none strong enough to challenge you, but none weak enough to need protection from their rivals. It keeps them focused on each other instead of organizing against provincial authority. Correct. What else? I hesitated, then pointed to a section of the map near the southern border. This area is deliberately under-defended. You're making it look like a weak point, but actually it's terrain that favors ambush tactics. If someone tried to invade through there, they'd be walking into a trap. Xi Ming's eyes gleamed. Most military commanders don't see that. They look at troop numbers and assume that's the whole story. You're not deploying soldiers in that area because the geography is your soldier, I said slowly, understanding dawning. The narrow passes, the difficult terrain, it turns the enemy's numbers against them. Exactly. He rolled up the map with satisfaction. You learn quickly. I had good motivation, I said dryly. In my father's house, understanding strategy was survival. Something shifted in his expression. Your family hurt you badly, didn't they? It wasn't really a question. I could have deflected, but Xi Ming had been direct with me from the beginning. I owed him the same honesty. I died when I was 26, poisoned by my husband with my family's blessing. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. Xi Ming went very still. What did you say? I hadn't meant to tell him, hadn't planned to tell anyone, but the words were out now, and suddenly I wanted him to know, wanted one person in this world to understand exactly what I was, exactly why I was the way I was. I died when I was 26. I looked directly at him, poisoned by my husband with my family's blessing. I woke up on the day of my engagement party 8 years in the past, with all my memories intact. He stared at me like I'd grown a second head. That's impossible. And yet, here I am. You're saying you've lived this life before, that you know the future? I know what the future was. I don't know what it will be now that I've changed things. I held his gaze steadily. In my first life, I married Chen Yuzhe. He and my sister were already lovers, but I didn't know. I spent 8 years trying to be a good wife while they destroyed me piece by piece. When my sister got pregnant with his child, my family decided I was no longer useful, so they poisoned me. Chen Yuzhe, my cousin.
Yes. And your sister married him anyway? In this life? I made sure she did, I said with cold satisfaction. I knew he was a gambler, knew he'd ruin her the same way he ruined me, so I broke our engagement and let her think she was stealing him, let her walk into the same trap that killed me. He was silent for a long moment, processing this. Then, and me? In your first life? We never met. You married someone else who died young, and you never remarried. You became one of the most powerful men in the empire, but you did it alone. So you married me to escape your family. I married you because you offered me exactly what I needed: distance from the capital, resources to build power, and a partnership instead of a prison. I met his eyes. But I also married you because in my first life I heard stories about the governor of Yunnan. They said you were ruthless but fair, brutal but honorable, someone who kept his word and rewarded competence. I thought if I had to marry anyone, better someone like that than someone who pretends to be kind while sharpening knives. Xi Ming rose and paced to the window, looking out over the darkening city. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. If what you're saying is true, If you really do remember another life, then you have knowledge that could be valuable, very valuable. Or very dangerous, I pointed out. If anyone knew, they'd call me a witch or a demon. Best case, I'd be locked up for study. Worst case, executed for heresy. I'm not going to execute you. He turned to face me. But I need to know, why tell me this? You could have kept it secret. Because you ask me to trust you with treason. This is me trusting you back. He studied me for a long moment, and I could see him reassessing everything he thought he knew about me. Finally, he nodded slowly. All right, I believe you. Or at least I believe that you believe it, which amounts to the same thing for practical purposes. He returned to his seat. Which means I have a wife who potentially knows future events, understands political strategy, and has very good reasons to want revenge on some very powerful people. Correct. And you married me because I could give you the tools for that revenge. Partially, I also married you because I genuinely thought we could be effective partners. I smiled slightly. Was I wrong? He laughed, a real laugh, surprised and genuine. No, you weren't wrong. He leaned forward. Tell me everything you remember about what happens next, every detail. We're going to use this. So I did. I told him about the drought that would hit 3 provinces over in 6 months, about the border conflict with the mountain tribes that would escalate next spring, about the political shifts in the capital, which ministers would rise and which would fall, about the assassination attempt on the emperor in 2 years that would spark a massive purge of suspected traitors. And I told him about my family, about father's schemes, mother's cold ambition, Lan Yang's vicious jealousy, about how they'd used me and discarded me and thought they could get away with it because I was weak. They won't think you're weak anymore, Ximing said when I finished. His voice was cold, calculating. Not by the time we're done. We? I asked. You're my wife. An insult to you is an insult to me, and I don't tolerate insults. He pulled out a fresh map, this one showing the entire southern region. Here's what we're going to do. First, we prepare for that drought you mentioned, buy up grain reserves quietly, stockpile in secure locations. When the drought hits and prices spike, we'll be the only ones with surplus to sell. That will make you very wealthy and very powerful. The capital will have to negotiate with you. Exactly. And while we're negotiating, you're going to use your family connections to gather information, letters to your parents, your sister. Play the dutiful daughter who's lonely and wants news from home. They'll think you're weak and isolated, so they'll be careless about what they tell you. I saw where he was going, and anything they tell me gets used to position us better. Your father's schemes, your mother's ambitions, we turn all of it to our advantage. His smile was sharp as a blade. They tried to kill you once. We're going to make sure they regret not finishing the job.
The first letter to father was carefully crafted, respectful, even affectionate. I asked about his health, about court politics, about Lan Ying's Yu marriage. I mentioned that Yunnan was interesting but different, that I missed the capital's refinement, that I hoped to visit someday. I played the role perfectly, the disappointing daughter who'd been sent away and was trying desperately to maintain connection with her family. Father's response came 6 weeks later. Brief, perfunctory. He was well. Court was busy. Lan Ying was adjusting to married life. And then, almost as an afterthought, your sister mentioned that Chen Yuzhe has been working with a merchant consortium on a new trade venture, some project involving southern silk routes. She seems quite excited about it. I read that paragraph 3 times, then showed it to Ximing. Southern silk routes, he said thoughtfully. That's my territory, and I haven't approved any new trade ventures involving the Chen family. Which means they're trying to establish routes without your permission, I said, probably assuming you're just a provincial governor who won't notice or won't care. They're going to be very disappointed. Ximing made a note. I'll have my people investigate. If they're moving goods through my territory without paying the proper fees, we'll intercept shipments. Politely, of course, just enforcing standard trade regulations. That will cost them money and make them look incompetent, I said with satisfaction.
Exactly. Your sister wanted to steal your life. Let's make sure that life is as expensive as possible. Over the next few months, we refined the strategy. I wrote letters to father, to mother, even occasionally to Lan Ying, each one carefully designed to extract information while presenting myself as harmless and isolated, and each response gave us more intelligence to work with. Mother mentioned father was supporting a new minister at court, someone named Lu Zhang, who was pushing for agricultural reforms. I remembered Lu Zhang from my previous life. He'd been corrupt, taking bribes from merchants to influence policy. He'd eventually been exposed and executed, taking down several allies with him. I told Ximing this. 2 weeks later, Ximing arranged for evidence of Lu Zhang's corruption to reach the imperial censorate. The investigation was quiet but thorough. Lu Zhang was arrested 3 months later, and father, who'd publicly supported him, suddenly looked incompetent and possibly complicit. Lan Ying wrote about a pregnancy. She was so excited, she said. Yu Zhe was thrilled. Everything was perfect. I knew from my previous life that she'd miscarry at 4 months. The grief would break her briefly, and Yu Zhe would blame her for being too delicate, too emotional. Their marriage would crack a little more. I wrote back with congratulations and carefully worded suggestions. Maybe she and Yu Zhe needed time apart. Maybe she should focus on her own health. Maybe the problem was stress from trying too hard to be perfect. Every letter was a tiny blade, carefully placed, not enough to be obvious, but enough to cut. The drought hit exactly as I predicted. 3 provinces over, crops failed, grain prices soared, and Yunnan province, under Ximing's careful management, suddenly had surplus to sell. The capital sent urgent requests. Could Governor Chen provide emergency grain shipments? The emperor himself was concerned about potential unrest. Ximing's response was a masterpiece of political maneuvering. Of course he could help. He was loyal to the throne, but transporting grain was expensive, and Yunnan's reserves were limited. He'd need appropriate compensation, and certain trade concessions, and perhaps some adjustments to the southern territory boundaries that had been disputed for years. He got everything he asked for. The grain shipments saved thousands from starvation, and Ximing was praised as a hero and a loyal servant of the empire. But he'd also just extracted massive concessions that made him significantly more powerful. Father wrote congratulating me on my husband's success. The subtext was clear. The Shen family expected to benefit from this new relationship. Perhaps some of those trade concessions could be directed towards Shen family business interests? I showed the letter to Ximing. He smiled coldly.
Your father wants to profit from my work while having done nothing to earn it. How typical. What do you want to do? I asked. Nothing, he said. Absolutely nothing. Let him wait for a response that never comes. Let him realize that you're not his tool anymore, that I'm not impressed by his title, and that if he wants favors from me, he'll have to offer something valuable in return. That will anger him, I warned. Good. Angry people make mistakes. He was right. Father's next letter was sharper, more demanding. Did I not understand the importance of family duty? Was I so ungrateful that I'd forgotten everything the Shen family had done for me? He expected me to leverage my position as the governor's wife to benefit my natal family. I wrote back mildly. Of course, I hadn't forgotten my family, but Ximing's position was complex, and there were many competing interests. I'd mentioned father's requests, but I couldn't guarantee anything. The response was cold fury, barely disguised as formality. You've made him desperate, Ximing observed when I showed him the letter. Desperate people take risks. What kind of risks? That's what we're going to find out. He set his intelligence network on father, watching and reporting, and within weeks we had our answer. Father was working with 2 other ministers to bypass Ximing's control over southern trade routes.
They'd been secretly funding a project to build new roads through tribal territory, roads that would allow merchants to avoid Yunnan province entirely. It was ambitious, expensive, and absolutely illegal. The tribal territories were autonomous by imperial decree, and any development required both tribal approval and provincial governor authorization. They had neither. "They'll fail," I said flatly. "The tribes won't allow it." "No, they won't. But by the time your father figures that out, he'll have wasted significant money and political capital." Shiming leaned back in his chair, looking satisfied. "We won't interfere. We'll just watch him destroy himself." "What if he succeeds somehow?" "He won't, but if he does, we have evidence of every illegal step he took. We can hand it to the Imperial Censorate whenever we want." His smile was cold. "Either way, your father loses." I thought about father in my previous life, how he'd agreed to my murder without hesitation, how he'd cut me from the family with less emotion than he'd used to dismiss a servant, how he'd never, not once, treated me like I mattered. "I want him to lose everything," I said quietly. "Not just this project, everything. His position, his reputation, his precious family legacy. I want him to feel what I felt, useless, disposable, erased." Shiming studied me. "That's not simple revenge, that's systematic destruction." "Yes. It will take years." "I have years." He nodded slowly. "Then we'll build a long-term strategy, not just attacks, but a comprehensive campaign to dismantle everything he's built." He pulled out fresh paper. "Let's start planning." While father's illegal road project slowly fell apart in the wilderness, Lan Ying's marriage was disintegrating in the capital. Her second pregnancy ended in another miscarriage. Yu Zhe's gambling had escalated despite his father's warnings. The Chen family was hemorrhaging money, and Minister Chen was making increasingly public threats about disinheritance. Lan Ying wrote begging for help. Could I speak to Shiming? Could he offer Yu Zhe a position in Yunnan, something respectable that would get him away from the capital's gambling houses and give him a fresh start? I read the letter aloud to Shiming, who laughed darkly. "She wants me to save her failing marriage by employing her incompetent husband." "She's desperate," I said. "In my first life, this is when she started really falling apart. The miscarriages, Yu Zhe's problems, the debt, it was crushing her."
"Good," Shiming said bluntly. "She tried to kill you. She deserves to be crushed." He wasn't wrong, but I looked at the letter, at Lan Ying's increasingly messy handwriting, and felt something complicated. Not quite pity, she'd earned every bit of her suffering, but a strange sort of satisfaction mixed with hollowness. This was what I'd wanted, to watch her live the life she'd stolen from me, to watch it destroy her the way it had destroyed me, and it was working perfectly. So why did it feel incomplete? "Chiyu?" Shiming's voice pulled me from my thoughts. "What are you thinking?" "That revenge is satisfying, but not fulfilling," I said slowly. "Watching them suffer is gratifying, but it doesn't actually give me anything. It just takes from them." "You want to build something positive, not just destroy them." "Yes," I looked at him. "Is that naive?" "No, it's smart." He pulled the map closer. "We've spent a year positioning ourselves defensively and attacking their weaknesses, but you're right, that's not enough. We need to build something that outlasts their destruction, something that makes you powerful in your own right, not just powerful relative to them." "What did you have in mind?" His smile was sharp and planning. "Tell me more about that assassination attempt on the Emperor, the one that happens in 2 years." The assassination attempt in my previous life had been catastrophic. A group of disaffected nobles had hired assassins to kill the Emperor during a hunting trip. The attempt had failed, but the ensuing investigation had led to massive purges. Anyone even loosely connected to the conspirators was executed or exiled. Dozens of families were destroyed. The capital had run red with blood.
I remembered every detail because father had been on the periphery of it, not involved in the actual conspiracy, but connected to several people who were. He'd barely escaped execution, and the terror of it had made him more cautious, more paranoid. I told Ximing all of this. "And if we exposed the conspiracy before the attempt?" he asked. "You'd save the emperor's life and destroy dozens of noble families at once. The emperor would be grateful and paranoid. He'd need reliable allies in the aftermath. Allies like a provincial governor who proved his loyalty by uncovering treason." "Exactly," I saw where he was going. "You'd be elevated, probably brought into the inner court as a military advisor, or given expanded authority over the southern provinces. And you'd be elevated with me, the governor's lady who helped uncover the plot. The emperor would owe you personally." I thought about standing in the imperial court with real power instead of just borrowed status. Thought about father having to bow to me, having to acknowledge me as someone who mattered. Thought about Lan Ying watching me rise while she sank. We'd need evidence, solid evidence that the emperor can't ignore, and we'd need to present it in a way that makes us look loyal, not like we were spying on nobles. "Can you remember who was involved? Names, connections?" I closed my eyes, pulling memories from my previous life. Lord Zhao Wei was the primary conspirator. He'd lost an inheritance dispute and blamed the emperor's chancellor. He brought in Lord Fang Chen and Lady Jianghua. Both had grievances about trade policies. And there were others, lesser nobles, who joined out of ambition or desperation. "And your father?" Father wasn't directly involved, but he'd loaned money to Lord Zhao and attended several private meetings where the conspiracy was discussed. In my previous life, he claimed innocence, said he thought they were just complaining about policies, not planning treason. He barely escaped execution. Ximing was making notes. "If we can prove his connection even loosely, the emperor will assume guilt, especially if everyone else in those meetings was a traitor." "That would destroy him," I said quietly, "completely. Even if he's not executed, he'd be stripped of title, property, everything." "Would that satisfy you?" I thought about father standing before the emperor, trying to claim innocence while evidence mounted against him. Thought about him losing everything the same way he'd planned for me to lose everything. Thought about him finally understanding what it felt like to be disposable.
"Yes," I said. "That would satisfy me. Then we have 2 years to build our case." Ximing's expression was focused, calculating. "We'll need spies in the capital, documentation of meetings, financial records showing money transfers. We'll need to be careful. If the conspirators realize someone knows, they might move up their timeline or abandon the attempt entirely. What do you need from me?" "Information. Names, dates, locations, everything you can remember. And letters. Keep writing to your family, keep them thinking you're isolated and harmless. The more they trust that you're not a threat, the more careless they'll be." Over the following months, we built the case methodically. Ximing had spies inserted into key positions, servants in noble households, merchants who attended private parties, guards who could be bribed to report on unusual meetings. Slowly, painstakingly, we gathered evidence. And I kept writing letters. To father, asking about his business ventures and mentioning that Ximing was interested in trade opportunities. To mother, asking about court gossip and family news. To Lan Ying, offering sympathy for her troubles and gently probing about who father was meeting with these days. Each letter extracted small pieces of information that we added to our growing file of evidence. Lan Ying was especially useful because she was desperate for connection. Her marriage was crumbling. Yuzhe had started keeping a courtesan, spending money they didn't have on gifts for his new favorite. Minister Chen had finally made good on his threat and drastically reduced Yuzhe's inheritance. Lan Ying was trapped in a gilded cage that was rapidly becoming less gilded and more cage. She told me everything in her letters. How Yuzhe ignored her, how father barely spoke to her anymore now that she'd failed to produce an heir, how mother blamed her for not managing her husband better, how isolated she felt, how desperate, how trapped. Everything I'd felt in my previous life,
she was feeling now. And while part of me savored that justice, another part noticed something unexpected. Her letters were increasingly similar to how I'd sounded in my first life, the same desperate need for validation, the same confusion about why nothing worked despite her best efforts, the same slow realization that she'd been lied to about everything. In one letter, she wrote, "Sister, sometimes I think about that day you broke your engagement to Brother Yuze. I thought you were being foolish and ungrateful. Now I wonder if you were being wise. Did you know? Did you see something I didn't? Or were you just lucky?" I didn't answer that question in my response, just offered more sympathy, more careful suggestions designed to make things worse. But her words stuck with me. Did she deserve this? Yes, absolutely. She'd stolen my life and planned my death. But did that make me better than her? Or just better at revenge? I mentioned this to Ziming one evening. He considered it carefully. "You're wondering if destroying them makes you as bad as they are." "Maybe." "It doesn't," he said firmly. "They tried to kill you. Everything you're doing now is self-defense and justice. There's a difference between attacking someone unprovoked and fighting back." "Is there? We're systematically destroying multiple people's lives. People who would destroy yours again if given the chance." He took my hand, an unusual gesture of physical comfort. "Chi-Wei, you can't afford mercy. Not yet. Maybe once you're powerful enough that they can't hurt you, you can choose compassion. But right now, hesitation is death." He was right, I knew. In my previous life, my mercy was my weakness. Every time I'd forgiven an insult, ignored a slight, tried to see the best in people, they'd used it against me. I couldn't afford to be that person again. 18 months into my marriage, I discovered I was pregnant. The physician confirmed it with a smile. "Congratulations, my lady. A healthy pregnancy from what I can tell. You should deliver in about 7 months." I sat in stunned silence after he left. A child. I was going to have a child. In my previous life, I'd had 12 children, 12 babies I'd carried and birthed and loved desperately. And Ziming sent every single one of them to die on battlefields, payment for killing the woman he'd actually loved. But this wasn't that life. This Ziming didn't love Lan Ying. He'd married me by choice, worked with me as a partner. This child wouldn't be a punishment. It would be... what? What would it be?
Ximing found me still sitting there an hour later, staring at nothing. "Chuye?" The physician said. He stopped. "You don't look happy." "I don't know what I am," I admitted. "In my first life, I had children, 12 of them." "12?" He looked shocked. "You, my previous husband, wanted heirs. I kept giving birth, kept trying to do my duty, and every single child was taken from me. The boys were sent to military training too young. The girls were married off to create alliances. None of them survived to 30. And when the last one died, when I'd given everything and had nothing left, I was discarded." I looked up at him. "So yes, I'm pregnant. And I don't know if that's a blessing or another way to be used." Ximing knelt in front of me, taking both my hands. "Listen to me carefully. This child is yours. Not mine, not your family's, not the empire's. Yours. Whatever happens, however we use this politically, because we will use it politically, the child's welfare comes first. I give you my word." "Why should I believe you?" "Because you know things about the future, which means you know I'm capable of cruelty when necessary, and you married me anyway, which means you decided I could be trusted despite that cruelty." His grip tightened. "You've never lied to me, Chuye. I won't lie to you. This child will be safe, protected. I swear it on my life." I searched his face, looking for deception. Found none. Just grim sincerity and something else, something that might have been protective anger on my behalf. "All right," I said, finally. "I believe you." "Good." He stood, helping me up. "Now, this changes our timeline.
We need to move faster on the conspiracy evidence. I want you elevated and secure before you're too pregnant to travel, because after the child is born, you'll be vulnerable for months." He was right. Pregnancy and childbirth made women politically weak, unable to travel, unable to fight, easy to control or eliminate. I needed to be in an untouchable position before I entered that vulnerable period. "How fast can we move?" I asked. 6 months, if we push hard. The conspiracy has been developing on schedule according to your memories. We have enough evidence now to make initial accusations. We just need more connections to your father." "I can get those," I said, mind already working. "Father's been writing more frequently, asking about trade opportunities. He's running out of money from the failed road project and needs new income streams. If I offer him a chance to invest in Yunnan business ventures, he'll jump at it, and any investment paperwork will create a financial trail we can use." Ximing smiled coldly. "Make the offer generous enough that he can't refuse. Let him think you finally learned your place and are being a dutiful daughter." I wrote the letter that evening, warm, apologetic, presenting a profitable opportunity to invest in Yunnan silk production. The returns would be excellent, I assured him. Ximing had given me permission to offer this to family as a gesture of reconciliation. Father's response was almost gleeful. Finally, I was being sensible. Of course he'd invest. He'd send the money immediately. The money came from accounts we already knew were connected to Lord Zhao Wei. Father was so desperate to recover his losses that he'd borrowed from a trader without realizing it. Perfect. We now had documentation linking father to Lord Zhao's finances, combined with evidence of him attending meetings where conspiracy was discussed. It wouldn't prove father was actively involved in assassination plans, but it would absolutely prove association with traitors. And in cases of treason, association was often enough for execution. 5 months into my pregnancy, with my belly just starting to show, Ximing requested an audience with the emperor. It was granted immediately. The emperor valued his loyal southern governor, especially after the grain crisis where Ximing had proved so helpful. We traveled to the capital with a military escort and a sealed document case that contained 2 years of carefully gathered evidence. The city looked different to me now. I'd left as a disposable daughter in an arranged marriage. I was returning as a provincial governor's pregnant wife with information that would shake the empire.
Father didn't know we were coming. We deliberately kept the visit secret. The look on his face when we arrived at the imperial palace was priceless. Shock, confusion, and then calculation as he tried to figure out what this meant. "Chi Yu," he said, approaching carefully. "What a surprise. If I'd known you were visiting, I would have arranged proper accommodations." "We're staying at the governor's residence," Ximing said coolly, not even bothering to be polite. "And we're not here for a family visit. We have business with the emperor." Father's smile froze. "Business? What business?" "Official business, imperial security matters, nothing that concerns you, Minister Shen." The dismissal was deliberate and public. I saw other nobles watching, saw them register the snub. Minister Shen's daughter and her husband, treating him like he was irrelevant. Father's face flushed, but he couldn't challenge Ximing without looking petty. He retreated with as much dignity as he could manage. Mother found me later that day. "Chi Yu, what is the meaning of this? Your father has done nothing but support you and your husband." "Really?" I interrupted gently. "Is that what you'd call it? Support?" She blinked, clearly not expecting me to push back. "You've always been difficult, but this level of disrespect—" "I'm pregnant," I said, changing the subject abruptly. She stopped mid-sentence. "What?" "I'm 5 months along. I thought you'd want to know you'll be a grandmother." Her expression went through several shifts. Surprise, automatic calculation about what a child meant for family connections, and then something that might have been genuine maternal feeling, for about 3 seconds. "That's wonderful news."
she said, but her voice was cautious. Does your father know? He does now. You just told him by being here. I smiled. I would have written, but we've been very busy. Governing an entire province takes significant time and attention. The subtext was clear. I had better things to do than maintain relationships with people who'd discarded me. Mother's face hardened. I see. Well, congratulations on your pregnancy. I hope the birth goes smoothly. She left without another word. No offer to help, no expression of joy, no interest in being part of her grandchild's life, just cold acknowledgement and colder departure. Good. I didn't want her anywhere near my child anyway. The Emperor received us in private the next morning. He was younger than I remembered from my previous life, only 35, still vigorous and sharp-eyed. He studied Xi Ming with the assessment of someone who knew exactly how valuable and dangerous his southern governor was. Governor Chen, your message suggested urgent matters. Speak freely. Xi Ming bowed. Your Majesty, I come with evidence of a conspiracy against your life. Complete silence. The Emperor's expression didn't change, but I saw his hands tighten on the arms of his throne. Continue. Xi Ming presented the evidence methodically. Financial records showing Lord Zhao Wei funding suspicious activities, testimony from servants about secret meetings, documents proving connections between multiple nobles, a timeline of meetings and planning, and finally, intercepted correspondence that explicitly discussed removing the obstacle to their political goals, obvious code for assassination. When is this attempt supposed to happen? The Emperor asked, his voice dangerously calm. Based on our intelligence, during the autumn hunting trip, approximately 4 months from now. And how long have you known about this? We began gathering evidence nearly 2 years ago. I wanted to be certain before bringing accusations of this magnitude. Treason is not something to be alleged lightly. The Emperor's eyes narrowed. 2 years. That's quite a long time to wait, Governor Chen.
Father didn't know we were coming. We deliberately kept the visit secret. The look on his face when we arrived at the Imperial Palace was priceless. Shock, confusion, and then calculation as he tried to figure out what this meant. Chi Yu, he said, approaching carefully. What a surprise. If I'd known you were visiting, I would have arranged proper accommodations. We're staying at the governor's residence, Xi Ming said coolly, not even bothering to be polite. And we're not here for a family visit. We have business with the Emperor. Father's smile froze. Business? What business? Official business, imperial security matters, nothing that concerns you, Minister Shen. The dismissal was deliberate and public. I saw other nobles watching, saw them register the snub. Minister Shen's daughter and her husband, treating him like he was irrelevant. Father's face flushed, but he couldn't challenge Xi Ming without looking petty. He retreated with as much dignity as he could manage. Mother found me later that day. Chi Yu, what is the meaning of this? Your father has done nothing but support you and your husband. Really? I interrupted gently. Is that what you'd call it? Support? She blinked, clearly not expecting me to push back. You've always been difficult, but this level of disrespect. I'm pregnant, I said, changing the subject abruptly. She stopped mid-sentence. What? I'm 5 months along. I thought you'd want to know you'll be a grandmother. Her expression went through several shifts. Surprise, automatic calculation about what a child meant for family connections, and then something that might have been genuine maternal feeling, for about 3 seconds. That's wonderful news, she said, but her voice was cautious. Does your father know? He does now. You just told him by being here. I smiled. I would have written, but we've been very busy. Governing an entire province takes significant time and attention. The subtext was clear. I had better things to do than maintain relationships with people who'd discarded me. Mother's face hardened. I see. Well, congratulations on your pregnancy.
I hope the birth goes smoothly." She left without another word. No offer to help, no expression of joy, no interest in being part of her grandchild's life, just cold acknowledgement and colder departure. Good. I didn't want her anywhere near my child anyway. The Emperor received us in private the next morning. He was younger than I remembered from my previous life, only 35, still vigorous and sharp-eyed. He studied Ximing with the assessment of someone who knew exactly how valuable and dangerous his southern governor was. "Governor Chen, your message suggested urgent matters. Speak freely." Ximing bowed. "Your Majesty, I come with evidence of a conspiracy against your life." Complete silence. The Emperor's expression didn't change, but I saw his hands tighten on the arms of his throne. "Continue?" Ximing presented the evidence methodically. Financial records showing Lord Zhao funding suspicious activities, testimony from servants about secret meetings, documents proving connections between multiple nobles, a timeline of meetings and planning, and finally, intercepted correspondence that explicitly discussed removing the obstacle to their political goals, obvious code for assassination. "When is this attempt supposed to happen?" the Emperor asked, his voice dangerously calm. "Based on our intelligence, during the autumn hunting trip, approximately 4 months from now." "And how long have you known about this?" "We began gathering evidence nearly 2 years ago. I wanted to be certain before bringing accusations of this magnitude. Treason is not something to be alleged lightly." The Emperor's eyes narrowed. 2 years. That's quite a long time to wait, Governor Chen. This was the dangerous moment. If the Emperor believed Ximing had delayed deliberately, it could be seen as its own form of disloyalty. "Your Majesty," I said, stepping forward before Ximing could respond. "Forgive my interruption, but the delay was my fault." Everyone turned to stare at me. "Your fault, Lady Chen?" the Emperor asked. "Yes, Your Majesty. My father, Minister Shen, appeared in the early evidence, not as a primary conspirator, but connected to several suspects. As his daughter, I felt obligated to investigate thoroughly before allowing accusations that might harm my natal family. I asked my husband to wait until we had irrefutable proof of who was truly guilty and who was merely unfortunate in their associations. It was a masterful lie. It made me look filial and conflicted, made Ximing look patient and thorough, and planted the seed that father was connected to this conspiracy. The Emperor studied me for a long moment. "You suspected your own father of treason?" "I suspected he might know something without realizing its significance," I said carefully. "My father is many things, Your Majesty, but I didn't believe him capable of true treason. I hoped our investigation would prove his innocence definitively." "And did it?" I glanced at Ximing, who opened another document. "Minister Shen attended at least 4 meetings where the conspiracy was openly discussed. He provided financial support to Lord Zhao, including money that was used to hire the assassins, and he was listed as a potential supporter who might provide political cover after the removal of Your Majesty." The Emperor's face had gone cold as stone. "I see. However," Ximing continued, "we have no evidence that Minister Shen knew the true purpose of these activities. It's possible he was simply a fool who failed to ask questions." "A fool in a position of significant power," the Emperor said dryly. "How reassuring." He stood, pacing. Everyone waited in tense silence. Finally, he turned back to us. "Governor Chen, you have done the Empire a great service. This conspiracy will be crushed before it can develop further. The traitors will be arrested and executed, and those who were merely foolish," he smiled without warmth, "will be given appropriate positions, somewhere they can do less damage." "Your Majesty is wise," Ximing said, bowing. "As for you, Lady Chen," the Emperor looked at me directly, "you showed remarkable sense in investigating your own father rather than blindly protecting him. That kind of loyalty, to truth over family, is rare and valuable. I serve the Empire first, Your Majesty. Family is secondary."
Would that all nobles felt the same. He nodded decisively. You both will be rewarded. Governor Chen, I'm expanding your authority over the entire southern region. And Lady Chen, I'm granting you an independent title, Lady Protector of the Southern Provinces. Your authority will be recognized at court, separate from your husband's position. I blinked. An independent title was almost unheard of for women. It meant I had legal standing, political power that didn't depend on Si Ming or any male relative. Your Majesty, I am deeply honored, I said, bowing low to hide my expression of fierce satisfaction. You've earned it. Now leave me. I have traitors to arrest. The arrests began that same day. Lord Zhao Wei was taken from his estate in chains. Lady Jiang Hua was arrested during a garden party. Lord Feng Chen tried to flee the city and was caught at the gates. Dozens of others, major and minor conspirators, were rounded up. And Father was summoned to the imperial palace. I watched from a screened viewing area as he entered the throne room, clearly confused by why he'd been called. He bowed to the emperor with his usual confidence, still believing he was untouchable. Minister Shen, the emperor said coldly, I have just learned of a conspiracy against my life, dozens of traitors arrested, and your name has come up repeatedly in the investigation. Father's face went white. Your Majesty, I assure you, you attended meetings with these traitors, you provided them with funding, you were listed as a potential supporter after the removal of your Majesty.
I had no idea. I thought they were simply discussing policy concerns. Ignorance is not a defense when the topic is treason. The emperor's voice cut like a blade. You should have known. You should have questioned. You should have reported. Your failure to do any of these things suggests either complicity or incompetence. Which is it, Minister Shen? Father was trapped. Claiming complicity meant execution. Claiming incompetence meant political death. Either way, he was finished. Your Majesty, I would never— He trailed off, finally realizing there was no good answer. I am not executing you, the emperor said finally, and Father sagged with relief. But neither can I trust you in a position of power. Effective immediately, you are removed from your ministerial position. Your assets will be audited to determine if any imperial funds were misappropriated, and you will be reassigned to a provincial administrative position, somewhere quieter. Destroyed. Not executed, but utterly destroyed. Father would lose his title, his wealth, his position, his reputation, everything he'd built over 30 years of careful political maneuvering, gone in one morning. And as he stood there in shock, the emperor added almost casually, Your daughter, the Lady Protector Chen Chu Yue, has been invaluable in this investigation. She showed true loyalty to the empire by helping uncover these traitors, even knowing it might implicate her own family. You should be proud of her. Father's face twisted. In that moment, he realized that I was behind this, that his discarded, disappointing daughter had destroyed him. He looked up at the viewing area, looked right at me, even though he shouldn't have been able to see through the screen, and his expression was pure hatred. I smiled. Let him hate me. Let him finally understand what it felt like to be powerless, dismissed, erased by people who should have protected you. Father was given a minor administrative post in a northwestern border province, barely civilized, harsh climate, no political importance. Mother was allowed to accompany him, though she looked like she'd aged 10 years when I saw her preparing for the journey. This is your doing, she hissed when she cornered me at what was essentially their exile ceremony. You destroyed your own father. He destroyed himself. I just made sure his actions had consequences. You vindictive, ungrateful— Careful, Mother. I'm the Lady Protector now. Insulting me is insulting an imperial appointee. She recoiled like I'd struck her, and then, surprisingly, her expression crumpled. I truly thought Lanyang was mine.
The midwife swore she'd done the switch carefully, that no one would ever know. But when I held her after I knew the truth, I kept thinking, she's not mine. She's just a maid's child pretending to be noble. And I couldn't— She trailed off. Couldn't love me. Yes, I noticed. I tried at first, but every time I looked at you, I saw the deception, saw the life Lanyang should have had being lived by someone else. So you took it out on me, treated me like I was worthless, let her steal my engagement, agreed when they decided to kill me. I kept my voice flat, emotionless. Did you try to stop them when they planned to poison me in that other life? She flinched. Did you try to stop them? Silence. And then, barely audible, no. Then you have no right to expect mercy now. I turned away. Enjoy the Northwest, Mother. I hear the winters are brutal. Lanyan came to see me before I left the capital. She looked terrible, thin, pale, with dark circles under her eyes that even makeup couldn't hide. Her pregnancy had failed again, her third miscarriage. Yuze had officially taken his courtesan as a concubine and now spent most of his time with her. You knew, she said without preamble. All along you knew what it would be like to marry him. Yes, and you let me do it anyway. You wanted it so badly. Who was I to stand in your way? She laughed bitterly. You're not the person I thought you were. That naive, desperate girl who just wanted father's approval, she's gone.
She was never real, I said quietly. She was just what you needed me to be so you could feel superior. The real me is this, someone who plans, who waits, who takes revenge methodically. And now you've won. You have power, a husband who respects you, a child on the way, while I have— She gestured helplessly. This! A husband who hates me, a family in disgrace, no children, no future. You tried to kill me, I reminded her. In another life, you and Yuze poisoned me while my parents watched. Did you expect me to forgive that? How do you know? She stopped. You couldn't know, unless— She was smarter than I'd given her credit for. I saw the moment she understood, or at least understood enough. Impossible, she whispered. But you do know. You know things you shouldn't be able to know. That poem at the spring festival, I'd never shown that to anyone. The warnings about my pregnancy, they were too specific. And father's downfall, you positioned everything perfectly, like you knew exactly what would happen. I said nothing. Let her work it through. You lived this before, she said slowly. Somehow you remember, and you came back to destroy us. Not to destroy you, I corrected, just to make sure you didn't destroy me again. Everything else was just justice. She stared at me for a long moment, and then her face crumpled. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. I was jealous, you were right. I was so jealous. You had the family name, the legitimacy, the easy acceptance. I had to fight for every scrap of affection, always terrified they'd discover the switch and throw me out. I thought if I could just have one thing that should have been yours, your engagement, your future, I'd finally feel secure. Tears were streaming down her face now. Real tears, not manipulative ones. But I never felt secure, just more desperate. And now I've lost everything anyway. Except in your version, I don't even have the comfort of thinking I was wronged, because I did this to myself. It was the first genuine emotion I'd ever seen from her. The first crack in the perfect, sweet facade she'd maintained her entire life. And I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no pity, no anger. Just tired. What do you want me to say, Lanying? That I forgive you? I don't. You made your choices and now you're living with them. That's not injustice. That's just consequences. I know. She wiped her face. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did,
what I lost, what I deserve. She bowed formally, a genuine bow of respect from one noble to another. Congratulations on your pregnancy, sister. I hope your child brings you more happiness than mine brought me. She left, and I never saw her again. Last I heard, she'd entered a Buddhist temple after her 4th miscarriage. Yuze divorced her officially and married his concubine. She died 3 years later of some illness, probably helped along by depression and despair. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I just felt empty. My son was born 7 months later in Yunnan, healthy and screaming. Shiming held him with surprising gentleness for a man made of military precision, and when he looked at me, his expression was softer than I'd ever seen. "What should we name him?" he asked. "Something that means a new beginning, or a second chance." We named him Shen Wei Ming, Wei for future and Ming for bright, a bright future, a new path. I held my son and thought about my 12 children from my previous life, the ones who died because they were tools in someone else's game, the ones I loved desperately but couldn't protect. This time would be different. This child would be protected, valued, given real choices instead of just duty and obligation. This time, I'd make sure of it. 5 years passed. Father died in his northwestern exile, officially from illness, but I suspected despair played a role. Mother returned to the capital and lived quietly in a small house Shiming and had purchased for her. She never asked to see her grandson. We never offered.
Yuze's gambling debts finally caught up with him. He was found dead in his residence, officially ruled a suicide but widely believed to be murder by creditors. His concubine wife married someone else within months. The conspiracy we'd exposed led to broader reforms in imperial security. Shiming was given even more authority, essentially becoming the unofficial controller of the entire southern third of the empire. I managed the civil administration while he handled military matters. We were an effective team. Our son grew healthy and bright. We had 2 more children, daughters this time. And unlike my first life where I'd had to produce heir after heir, Shiming was satisfied with 3 children and made no demands for more. "Why?" I asked him once. "Most men want sons, want heirs, want to build dynasties." "I want a functional family," he replied simply, "not a breeding program. 3 children are plenty." It was such a simple answer, but it meant everything. He saw me as a person, not a womb, saw our children as people, not dynasty-building tools. I'd gotten my revenge, built my power, destroyed the people who destroyed me, but somehow this quiet moment of being valued just for existing felt like the real victory. Lady Zhao visited from the capital when Wei Ming was 7 years old. She'd survived the conspiracy purges by being too insignificant to bother with, and she still loved gossip. "You know," she said over tea, "everyone thought you were the boring Shen daughter, too serious, too quiet, no charm. But you ended up the most successful of all of us." "Success is subjective," I said mildly. "Oh, don't be modest. You're the lady protector, your husband essentially controls half the empire, your children are healthy and well-educated. Meanwhile, look at everyone else from our generation." She ticked them off on her fingers. Lan Ying, dead in a temple, Lady Wang, divorced and disgraced, Lady Feng, married to a minor official in the middle of nowhere. You won, Lady Chen, completely and absolutely. Had I won? I thought about my previous life, the desperate, eager girl who just wanted to be loved, about Lan Ying who'd wanted security so badly she'd destroyed everything to get it, about Father who valued power over people, about all of them chasing things that turned to ashes in their hands. And then I thought about Shiming who'd given me partnership instead of ownership, about my children who would grow up valued for themselves, not for what they could provide to others, about the life I'd built that was genuinely mine, not stolen or borrowed or contingent on someone else's approval. "Yes," I said finally,
I suppose I did win. That night, I stood on the balcony overlooking Yunnan City, watching lights flicker in the darkness below. Ximing joined me, handing me a cup of warm wine. "Do you think they understood?" I asked quietly. At the end, "Do you think they realized what they'd done to me?"
Ximing thought carefully before answering. Justice isn't about them understanding. It's about you being safe, powerful, and free. Everything else is just symmetry. He was right. My revenge had never really been about making them suffer, though I'd enjoyed that. It had been about making sure they could never hurt me again, making sure I had the power to protect myself and my children, making sure that this time, when someone tried to erase me, I could fight back. And I'd succeeded. Completely. "Come inside," Ximing said gently. "It's getting cold, and Wei Ming wants you to read him that military treatise you've been translating." I smiled. Of course my 7-year-old wanted military strategy as a bedtime story. Like father, like son. "He gets that from his mother," Ximing said with amusement. "I never cared about theoretical strategy, but you read Sun Tzu for fun." We went inside together, and I read to my son about flanking maneuvers and supply line management while he asked incredibly smart questions. Afterward, I checked on the girls, both sleeping peacefully, and then returned to my own rooms where Ximing was reviewing the next week's schedule. This was my life now. Strategy sessions and family time, political maneuvering and bedtime stories. Building an empire while raising children who would inherit something worth having. I thought about my previous life one last time. The poison in my throat, the betrayal in their eyes, the loneliness of dying in a room full of people who wanted me dead. And then I let it go. That life was over. That Shen Shuyu had died. This Shen Shuyu, no, Chen Shuyu, the Lady Protector, was alive, powerful, and finally free. And that was the best revenge of all. 10 years after my rebirth, the Emperor summoned us to the capital for a major imperial assembly. It was unusual. All provincial governors, key ministers, and influential nobles were required to attend. The official reason was to celebrate 20 years of the emperor's reign. The real reason, according to Ximing's intelligence network, was succession planning. The emperor's health was declining, not dramatically, but enough that he was thinking about the future, and he wanted to see who would support his chosen heir and who might cause problems. "This is an opportunity," Ximing said as we prepared for the journey. "The next emperor will determine the balance of power for the next generation. If we position ourselves correctly now, we can secure advantages that will last decades. And if we position ourselves incorrectly, then we become threats to be eliminated." He said it calmly, like discussing weather, which is why we're bringing all 3 children. I looked up sharply. "Why? That seems like putting them at risk." "It's the opposite. The emperor values family, showing him our children, healthy, well-educated, clearly no threat to imperial succession, proves we're building a legacy here in Yunnan, not plotting to seize the throne. It makes us look stable and satisfied." He was right strategically, but the idea of bringing my children into the capital's viper's nest made my skin crawl. "They'll be safe," Ximing assured me. "I'll have guards on them at all times. And honestly, Chu Yu, your worry is showing. You're the Lady Protector who helped expose a major conspiracy. You can't look afraid of capital politics." I took a breath, steadied myself. He was right. I'd built power precisely so I could protect my children. Time to trust that the power was real. We made the journey with appropriate ceremony, military escort, multiple carriages, enough display to remind everyone of Yunnan's importance. Wei Ming, now 12, rode part of the way on horseback with his father, already learning command presence. The girls, 9 and 7, traveled in my carriage and peppered me with questions about the capital. "Will we see the imperial palace? Will there be other children? Mother, why do you look worried?" I forced a smile.
Just thinking about old times, the capital holds many memories for me. The city looked both familiar and strange, the same grand architecture, the same bustling markets, but I saw it differently now. Before, I'd seen it as the center of the world, the place
where everything important happened. Now I saw it as just one city in a vast empire, and not even the most strategically valuable one. We were given quarters in the governor's residence, the same building where I had prepared for my wedding to Yuze all those years ago. I walked through familiar halls and felt nothing but distant amusement at how much had changed. Mother came to visit the day after we arrived. She was 60 now, gray-haired and stooped, living on the pension Shiming and I provided. She'd never asked to see us or her grandchildren in all these years. "Chu Yue," she said formally, "thank you for receiving me." "Mother," I gestured for her to sit. "Would you like tea?" "Please." We sat in awkward silence while servants prepared tea. I studied her, the lines on her face, the tremor in her hands, the way she wouldn't quite meet my eyes. "Why are you here?" I asked finally. "I wanted to see my grandchildren before I die." "You've had 10 years to visit Yunnan." "I know." Her voice was soft. "I was ashamed, am ashamed, of what we did to you, what I allowed." "You were more than ashamed," I said calmly. "You were complicit. You chose Lan Ying over me repeatedly, knowing I was the true daughter. You agreed when father planned to have me killed. Shame doesn't erase that." She flinched. "I know. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted to see them, to know that something good came from all this ugliness." I could have said no, could have turned her away, refused her even this small thing. It would have been justified. But I thought of my children, who'd never known their maternal grandmother because of old wounds and older hatred. Thought of Wei Ming asking why he only had one set of grandparents. Thought of how my revenge, complete as it was, had also cost them something. "One visit," I said, "supervised. If they want to see you again, that will be their choice, not mine." Relief flooded her face. Thank you, Chu Yue." The visit was stilted and awkward. Mother tried too hard, overwhelmed them with compliments and questions. But Wei Ming, perceptive as always, seemed to understand the subtext. When Mother left, he asked quietly, "She hurt you, didn't she, when you were young?" "Yes." "But you let her visit anyway?" "Because holding grudges forever is exhausting, and because you and your sisters deserved the choice to know her or not. That wasn't my choice to make for you." He thought about this seriously. "I think I'd like to see her again. She seems sad and lonely, and you always taught us to be strategically kind when possible." I laughed at that. Strategically kind. Yes, I suppose I did teach you that. Is it wrong to be kind for strategic reasons instead of just because? No. Actions matter more than motivations. If you're kind to someone, even for strategic reasons, they still benefit from the kindness. It was something I'd learned slowly, over years of revenge and political maneuvering. Intentions mattered less than I'd once thought. Father probably intended to build a powerful family legacy. His actions still destroyed people. I intended revenge. My actions still built something positive for my children. The universe didn't care about intentions, only outcomes. The Imperial Assembly was held in the Grand Hall, with hundreds of nobles and officials in attendance. The Emperor looked older than I remembered, pale, thinner, clearly fighting illness as he maintained regal bearing. 20 years, he announced to the assembled crowd, 20 years of peace and prosperity, built on the loyalty of people like Governor Shi Ming Chen, who secured our southern borders and prevented countless conflicts. Shi Ming bowed as attention focused on us. And Lady Protector Chu Yue Chen, whose intelligence helped expose a dangerous conspiracy and whose administrative skills have made Yunnan Province a model of effective governance.
I bowed as well, aware of dozens of eyes assessing, calculating, wondering about our influence. As I consider the future, the Emperor continued, I want to ensure stability continues after I'm gone. My eldest son, Crown Prince Zhao, will inherit the throne, but he will need experienced advisors. Governor Chen, I would like you to serve as military chancellor to the Crown Prince, effective immediately. The room erupted in whispers. Military chancellor was one of the highest positions in the empire, with authority over all military forces. It meant Siming would effectively control imperial defense. Your Majesty honors me beyond measure, Siming said, bowing deeply. I accept with gratitude and pledge my loyalty to Crown Prince Zhao. And Lady Protector Chen, the Emperor added, I would like you to serve as Imperial Administrator for Southern Affairs, coordinating between the provinces and the capital. Your position will be formalized with appropriate rank and authority. Another wave of whispers. The Emperor was essentially creating a new high office just for me, giving me official power over a huge section of the empire. I bowed. Your Majesty's trust honors me. I will serve faithfully. As we returned to our seats, I caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd, Chen Yuzer's father, Minister Chen, looking much older and sadder than I remembered. Yuzer's death had broken something in him. He caught my eye and nodded slowly. Acknowledgement, perhaps, or respect. The cousin who'd wasted his life was gone, but the family member who'd succeeded was honored. That night, there was a banquet. Nobles circled us like sharks, offering congratulations that barely masked envy and fear. We were too powerful now, too close to the throne. We'd become exactly the kind of threat that dynasties eventually eliminate. They're planning already, Siming murmured as we smiled and accepted toasts, thinking about how to undermine us before the Crown Prince takes power. Let them plan, I said quietly. We've had 10 years to build our foundation. They're working from fear. We're working from strength. Crown Prince Zhao approached us personally. He was 25, competent but not brilliant, experienced but not innovative, a safe choice for emperor, which is probably why his father had chosen him. Governor Chen, Lady Protector Chen, I would like to work with you both. My father speaks highly of your loyalty and competence. We serve the Empire, Your Highness, now and in the future. Good. I'll be honest, I'm inheriting significant challenges. Border tensions, economic pressures, faction conflicts at court. I need advisors I can trust absolutely. People who care about stability more than personal advancement. You have our loyalty, I assured him, both personal and professional. He studied us both carefully. My father says you exposed the conspiracy that would have killed him and that you could have used that information for leverage, but instead brought it directly to him. Why? Because serving the Empire serves our interests, I said simply. We have children, Your Highness. We want them to inherit a stable world, not one torn apart by civil war. Supporting legitimate authority is the most practical way to ensure that. He smiled slightly. Practical loyalty. I appreciate the honesty. He glanced toward where my children stood with their assigned guards. Your son, Wei Ming, he's being educated in military strategy? Yes, Your Highness. He shows aptitude. I have a daughter, Princess Minghua. She's 10, bright, interested in governance. Perhaps, he left the suggestion hanging. A marriage alliance between our families. It would cement our position irreversibly, but also make us permanent targets for anyone who opposed the Crown Prince's succession. I glanced at Siming. He gave the tiniest nod. We'd be honored to discuss such a possibility when the children are older, Your Highness, though, of course, their preferences should be considered as well. Of course, I'm just thinking ahead, planning for stability. He bowed slightly.
Enjoy the banquet. We'll speak more formally soon." As he walked away, Seeming whispered, "That just made us indispensable to the next dynasty, also enormous targets." I know, but refusing would have been suspicious. And honestly, a marriage alliance means our grandchildren could have imperial blood. That's generational security.
Assuming we survive long enough to have grandchildren. He wasn't wrong. The higher we rose, the more dangerous our position became. We'd essentially become too powerful to ignore and too threatening to trust completely. The next day, Mother visited again, this time with a warning. "There are people talking," she said quietly. "Old nobles who resent how quickly you've risen. They're saying the Lady Protector has too much influence, that Governor Chen controls too much military power. They're calling you threats to proper order." "Let them talk," I said dismissively. "Chi-Yu, listen to me. I know I have no right to give you advice, but I've lived in this city for 60 years. I know how it works. You're too visible, too successful. They'll find a way to bring you down if you're not careful." "Who's they?" She named several nobles, minor ministers, old families with traditional power, people who'd been overlooked as Ximing and I rose. None particularly powerful individually, but collectively they represented significant opposition. "They're planning to accuse you of overreach, to suggest that you're building an independent power base that threatens imperial authority. If they get enough support, the emperor might be forced to curtail your power just to maintain balance." It was good intelligence, and surprisingly, it seemed like Mother was genuinely trying to help. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because you're my daughter, my real daughter, the one I should have protected all along. I can't change the past, Chi-Yu, but I can at least try to help you now, even if it's too little, too late." I studied her for a long moment. "Thank you. This is useful information. Be careful, please. You have children now. You have everything to lose. Don't let pride or vengeance make you careless." After she left, I shared the information with Ximing. He was unsurprised. "I expected this. We've accumulated too much too fast. The question is how to handle it. We could step back, reduce our visible power, delegate authority, look less threatening. Or we could eliminate the opposition before they can organize effectively." I looked at him sharply. "You mean kill them?" "Not necessarily kill, but discredit, remove from power, neutralize as threats. We've done it before." He wasn't wrong. We'd destroyed my father, helped purge the conspiracy, maneuvered people out of position dozens of times. This would just be more of the same. But something about it felt different. "I'm tired," I said quietly. "Tired of always fighting, always planning, always seeing threats everywhere. We've secured our position. We have power, wealth, healthy children. Can't that be enough?" Ximing set down his papers and looked at me seriously. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe Mother is right. Maybe we should be more careful, less aggressive. We don't need to destroy everyone who opposes us. We just need to be secure enough that they can't destroy us." That's a significant shift in strategy. I know, but think about it. We've spent 10 years building power through revenge and maneuvering. What if we spent the next 10 building power through competence and alliances, not fighting enemies, but creating partners? He considered this. It's riskier in some ways, requires trusting people who might betray us. Everything requires trust eventually, and I'd rather build something positive than spend my whole life destroying threats. Ximing smiled slowly. "You're changing. The woman I married 10 years ago would have wanted blood. The woman you married 10 years ago had just been reborn from being murdered. She was operating from trauma and fear. Now I'm trying to operate from something else." "What?"
I thought about my children, sleeping safely in guarded rooms. Thought about my position as Lady Protector, which gave me real power to improve people's lives. Thought about Xi Ming, who'd proven himself a true partner. Thought about Mother, trying clumsily to make amends after 60 years. Hope, I said finally. I'm trying to operate from hope instead of fear. That's dangerous, Xi Ming warned. Hope makes you vulnerable. So does constant paranoia. At some point, you have to decide if you're building something or just defending ruins. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, all right, we'll try it your way. Build alliances instead of destroying enemies. But, Chi-Yu, if they come for us anyway, if they threaten our children, I won't hesitate to respond with force. Neither will I assured him. I'm choosing hope, not stupidity, but I want to at least try building instead of destroying. The next 5 years were different. Instead of maneuvering against opponents, we worked with them, found common ground, created mutual benefits, built coalitions based on shared interest rather than fear. It was harder than simple destruction, required more patience, more diplomacy, more willingness to compromise. But it worked. The nobles who'd planned to accuse us of overreach were brought into projects where they could benefit from Yunnan's success. Trade agreements, infrastructure development, shared resources. We made them partners instead of enemies. Not all of them accepted. A few remained hostile, tried to undermine us, but without broad support, they were just isolated complaints, easily dismissed. Crown Prince Chao officially proposed a marriage alliance between Wei Ming and Princess Minghua when they turned 16 and 14 respectively. Both children were consulted, unusual for noble marriages, but Xi Ming and I insisted. Wei Ming met Minghua several times under carefully supervised conditions, reported back that she was smart and not annoying, which is better than most girls. High praise from a 16-year-old boy. Minghua's assessment of Wei Ming was more articulate. He's serious but kind, understands strategy but isn't cruel. I think we could work well together. They were married 2 years later in a ceremony that united the Chen family with the imperial line. The emperor, now quite ill, attended and gave his blessing. 3 months later, he died peacefully, and Crown Prince Chao became Emperor Chao. Our son was now married to the new emperor's daughter. Our position was secure for generations. But more importantly, Wei Ming seemed genuinely happy. He and Minghua worked together effectively, built a strong partnership, respected each other. It wasn't passionate romance, but it was real companionship and mutual regard. Better than love in some ways, more stable, more lasting. Mother died that same year, peacefully in her sleep. She'd spent her last years visiting occasionally, building tentative relationships with her grandchildren. Never fully forgiven, but at least acknowledged, at least present. Her funeral was small but respectful. I stood by her grave and felt, not grief exactly, but a kind of closure. The woman who'd chosen Lan Ying over me, who'd agreed to my death, who'd spent decades regretting but never quite fixing her mistakes, she was gone now, and I'd outlived her, outlasted her, built something that would last long after she was forgotten. That felt like enough. 20 years after my rebirth, Emperor Chao summoned me to a private audience. He'd been emperor for 3 years now, governing competently, if not brilliantly, maintaining the stability his father had built. Lady Protector, he said formally, then smiled. Or should I say grandmother-in-law? Minghua tells me she's pregnant. I smiled genuinely. She told Wei Ming yesterday, we're very pleased. As am I. The continuity is important. He gestured for me to sit. But I didn't call you here for family matters. I have a question about the past.
I felt a flicker of wariness. Your Majesty? Your father always said you had extraordinary foresight, that you predicted events that seemed impossible to predict. The drought, the conspiracy, political shifts that no one else saw coming. He studied me intently. How did you know? This was the dangerous question, the one I'd been avoiding for 20 years.
I could lie, could claim intelligence networks, careful analysis, lucky guesses. But Emperor Zhao was smart enough to see through that. And more importantly, he was asking directly, which meant he'd already formed suspicions. Better to control the narrative than let him imagine something worse. Your Majesty, I said carefully, if I told you something impossible, would you believe me or have me executed for madness? That depends on whether the impossible thing was useful or threatening. Fair enough. I died once, I said quietly, in another life, another version of events. I was murdered by my family when I was 26, and then I woke up 8 years in the past, on my 18th birthday, with all my memories intact. Silence. Emperor Zhao's expression didn't change, but I saw his hands tighten slightly on his throne. You're claiming what? Reincarnation? Divine intervention? I'm claiming I don't know what happened or why, only that it did happen. I remember living and dying and living again. That's how I knew about the drought, the conspiracy, all of it. I'd seen it before. And you never told my father? I told my husband. No one else until now. Why are you telling me? Because you asked directly. Because you're emperor now and you deserve to know who your advisors really are. And because, I took a breath, because I'm tired of secrets. I've spent 20 years using hidden knowledge to build power and security, but I want the next 20 years to be different. I want to actually trust the people I work with, which requires them to know the truth. Emperor Zhao was silent for a long, tense moment. If this became public, he said finally, you'd be branded a witch or a heretic, possibly executed, certainly discredited. It would destabilize everything you've built. I know. So this truth is now a vulnerability. You're trusting me with your life. Yes, Your Majesty, I'm trusting you with my life, just as your father trusted me with his. He smiled slightly. Symmetry, I appreciate that. He rose, paced to the window. Assuming I believe this impossible story, and I'm not saying I do, but assuming, it means you've been operating with knowledge no one else has, could have used it to seize power yourself, could have manipulated events for personal gain. Instead, you've used it to serve the empire and protect your family. Correct. That shows remarkable restraint. Most people with such an advantage would have been more ambitious. I tried ambition in my first life. I got poisoned. This time, I just wanted safety and maybe some justice. And you achieved both. He turned back to face me. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to file this conversation in my memory as extremely useful intelligence that I won't examine too closely. I'm going to continue trusting you and Governor Chen as my primary advisors, and I'm never going to ask about this again. Your Majesty is wise. Your Majesty is practical, he corrected. You've served this empire well for 20 years. Whether you have supernatural knowledge or are just extremely lucky and perceptive, the result is the same. You're valuable. I'm not going to destroy that value over theological questions about reincarnation. Relief flooded through me. Thank you, Your Majesty. Thank you for being honest. It couldn't have been easy to admit something so dangerous. He smiled. Now go home to your family. Your daughter-in-law needs you. Pregnancy is difficult, especially for someone with imperial responsibilities. I bowed and left, feeling lighter than I had in years. The secret was shared, the burden was split, and I was still alive, still trusted, still secure. Maybe hope really was better than fear after all. Manhwa delivered a healthy son 9 months later. They named him Chen Zhao, honoring Emperor Zhao.
My first grandchild, born into security and love and a world where he'd be valued for himself, not just his utility. I held him and thought about my 12 children from my first life, the ones who died too young, used and discarded, the ones I'd failed to protect because I'd had no power. This time, I had power. This child would be protected. All my grandchildren would be. Wei Ming and Ming Hua had 3 more children over the next decade. My daughters married well, one to a military commander, one to a merchant prince who'd built an empire trading with Western territories. Both marriages were partnerships, not prisons. Both daughters were happy. Shi Ming and I grew older together. He retired from active military command at 60, though he remained as strategic advisor to the emperor. I continued as imperial administrator until I was 55, then passed the position to a younger administrator I'd trained myself. We moved back to Yunnan permanently, to the residence where we'd built our life together. Our children visited regularly. Our grandchildren spent summers with us, learning governance and strategy and how to build something that lasted. I taught them what I'd learned across 2 lifetimes: that power without purpose was empty, that revenge was satisfying but insufficient, that the greatest victory was building something that outlasted your enemies instead of just destroying them. One afternoon, when I was 62 and Shi Ming 65, we sat in the garden watching our grandchildren play. Chen Zhao, now 15, was teaching the younger ones military formations, using sticks as practice swords. "Do you regret any of it?" Shi Ming asked quietly. "The revenge, the manipulation, the years of maneuvering?" I thought carefully before answering. I regret that it was necessary, that being weak meant being prey, but I don't regret surviving or protecting myself or building this. I gestured at our family, our home, our life. They tried to erase me. Instead, I built a legacy. You did more than that. You changed the empire. The reforms you implemented, the administrative systems you created, they'll last generations. We changed the empire, I corrected. I couldn't have done any of it without you. He smiled and took my hand. You would have found another way. You're too stubborn to fail. Determined, I said, not stubborn. There's a difference. Tell me the difference. Stubborn people keep trying the same failed approach. Determined people try new approaches until something works. I'm determined. He laughed, and it was warm and genuine. Do you know what I regret? What? That we didn't have more years together. I wish I'd met you earlier, known you longer. We have time still, plenty of time. But that wasn't true. Shi Ming died 2 years later, quietly, in his sleep after a short illness. He was 67. We'd been married for 34 years. The funeral was massive. Governors, military commanders, imperial officials, all coming to pay respects to the man who'd secured the Southern Empire for 40 decades. Emperor Zhao himself attended, gave a eulogy praising Shi Ming's loyalty and competence. I stood through it all, dry-eyed and composed, not because I didn't grieve, but because I'd learned over 2 lifetimes that public grief was weakness, and I couldn't afford weakness even now. But at night, alone in the rooms we'd shared for 34 years, I let myself cry. Not for the life I'd lost, I'd had that grief in my first life. This time, I cried for the partnership I was losing, the man who'd seen me at my most vengeful and most vulnerable, who'd trusted me with treason and loved me anyway, who'd given me safety and space and support to become something more than I'd ever imagined. He'd been my ally, my partner, my friend, and now he was gone. I was 70 years old before I really felt like myself again, surrounded by children and grandchildren, managing a smaller but still significant portion of Yunnan's administration, teaching the next generation everything I'd learned. Mother's birthday, if she'd lived, would have been that spring. On impulse, I visited her grave.
I forgave you, I told the stone marker. Eventually. Not because you deserved it, but because holding on to hatred was exhausting. You were a terrible mother in many ways, but in the end, you tried. That counts for something." The stone, obviously, didn't answer, but saying it out loud felt important, final. I visited Father's grave too, out in that northwestern territory where he died in exile. It had taken weeks to arrange the journey, but I wanted to see it. His marker was small, barely maintained. No one remembered him here. No legacy, no impact, just a forgotten official who died far from power. "You tried to erase me," I told his grave. "Tried to make me disappear like I'd never mattered. But I'm still here, still standing, still remembered. And you're," I gestured at the neglected grave, "this. Forgotten. Irrelevant. Erased." It should have felt triumphant. Instead, it just felt sad. He'd had potential once. Intelligence, ambition, political skill. He could have built something real, something lasting. Instead, he'd wasted it on schemes and betrayals and trying to control things that couldn't be controlled. What a waste. I left a stick of incense anyway. Not for him, for the person he could have been if he'd made different choices. Lanying's grave was in a temple cemetery outside the capital. I visited last mostly because I wasn't sure how I'd feel. Her marker was prettier than Father's. The temple had maintained it well. Someone, probably Yuze before he died, had paid for regular upkeep. "You wanted my life so badly. Wanted the status, the husband, the security, and you got it all. Every poisonous bit of it." I sat down on the grass next to her grave. "I'm not glad you suffered. I thought I would be, but I'm not. I'm just tired of the whole thing. Tired of revenge and bitterness and carrying grudges across lifetimes." The spring wind rustled through the cemetery trees. "I won. Completely and thoroughly. I got everything. Power, family, legacy, a long life. And you got nothing. That should be enough for me to let it go. So I'm going to try." I stood up, brushed grass from my robes. "Goodbye, Lanying. I hope your next life is kinder than this one was." And then I left, and I didn't look back. I was 78 when Emperor Zhao summoned me one final time. He was 52 now, graying but still healthy, a competent ruler who'd maintained peace and prosperity. My grandson, Chen Zhao, was his military advisor. My granddaughter was married to one of his sons. The family ties ran deep. "Lady Protector," he said formally, then smiled. "You know, you'll always be the Lady Protector to me, even though you retired 20 years ago." "Old titles die hard, Your Majesty." "Indeed." He gestured to the documents on his desk. "I'm writing the official history of my father's reign. The chroniclers asked me about the conspiracy, about how it was uncovered, and I realized I should ask you. What do you want recorded?" "The truth, Your Majesty." "Which is?" "That Governor Chen Shiming and Lady Chen Qiyue identified treasonous activity through careful intelligence gathering and reported it to the emperor, saving his life and stabilizing the empire." I paused. "The rest, my personal history, my family's betrayals, my unique circumstances, those don't need to be included." "You don't want credit for your insight?" "I want the empire to remember that loyalty and competence were rewarded, that people who serve well are valued. That's the legacy that matters." He nodded slowly. "You're right. The personal details are less important than the principle." He made a note. "The official record will show that you served faithfully and were rewarded justly. Is there anything else you want included?" I thought about everything I'd learned, everything I'd survived, everything I'd built. Include that women can serve the empire as effectively as men if given the opportunity, that competence matters more than gender or birth status, that the empire is stronger when it values all its people, not just the traditionally powerful. "That's almost revolutionary," Emperor Zhao said with amusement.
It's practical.
You've seen it work for 50 years. I'm just asking you to formalize it so future generations can build on it, instead of having to fight the same battles over again. Done. The official history will note that Emperor Zhao I expanded opportunities for women in imperial service, following the example of Lady Protector Chen Qi-wei. He smiled. Your legacy is secure. Thank you, Your Majesty. As I left the palace for the last time, I felt complete, whole. The girl who died at 26, betrayed and powerless, had been avenged. The woman who'd clawed her way to power through revenge and manipulation had grown into someone who built instead of destroyed. And the empire I left behind was better than the one I'd been reborn into. That was enough. I died peacefully at 83, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The illness was quick and relatively painless, a fever that didn't break, a slow decline, and then sleep. As I drifted off, I thought about my 2 lives. The first one, full of pain and betrayal and a death that haunted me for decades. The second one, full of revenge and building and love and loss and ultimate triumph. If I had to do it all again, would I choose differently? Maybe. I'd been ruthless sometimes, cruel in my revenge. I'd destroyed people who maybe could have been redeemed. I'd let bitterness drive me longer than necessary. But I'd also survived, protected my children, built something lasting, changed an empire for the better. That balanced the scales, I thought. That was enough. My last thought, as the darkness closed in for the second and final time, was of Xi Ming, wondering if I'd see him again wherever souls went after death, wondering if he'd approve of what I'd built after he was gone. And then there was nothing.